Well, welcome to talk on medieval Spain. We're going to go into quite a bit of detail. I want to tell you ahead of time here is that I was at Claremont Graduate University, and I had this incredible professor, very dynamic, through Pomona College, and his name was Kenneth Baxter Wolf. Um, and he's actually legendary when it comes to circles in connection to medieval Spain. He's the best of the best, and he is dynamic. He's not an easy professor, but he is wonderful. And so that got me started into my interest in medieval Spain. What I loved about him is that also all the documentation was in Latin. And so we had to go through the original languages. And so some of this that you're going to see, you're going to actually hear today are a byproduct of that course and then subsequent research, keeping things up to date. Um, and if you're interested, I do have a book list of books I recommend. I just took a photo of my shelf that has all medieval Spain on it. So I do have to tell you, this is going to be a detailed talk. So hold on. So here we begin. So when we set out on our quest to discover the history of medieval Spain, we find ourselves encountering many conflicting geographical, religious, political, ideological forces. We have North versus South, Europe versus North Africa, Catholic Christianity versus Arian Christianity, and then in turn, Catholic Christianity versus Judaism and then Islam, a mentality of accommodation and compromise versus a mentality of rejection and intolerance, policies of acceptance versus policies of expulsion, religious rhetoric versus pragmatic plain speech, and of course, cultural identity versus cultural ambivalence. That is the soup which makes up medieval Spain. Yet one single thread moves through them all, despite all the contradictions. The Spaniards ultimately sought to unite the Iberian Peninsula as one. This unity was sometimes pursued through attempting to assert the domination of one ideology over the other. Other times, this unity was sought through consensus, with those advocating this view believing there could be unity in diversity. What makes the history of medieval Spain so interesting is that just when it appears that one force will be triumphant over all of the others, suddenly, out of nowhere, another force or event occurs, and it's usually pretty violent and completely reverses the situation. Unlike the ebb and flow types of transformations that are characteristic of many lands at some point, it is the marked style of Spain to be historically drastic, severe, and brash. You'll see that beyond a reasonable doubt during this talk. Historically and religiously speaking, Spain had much at stake globally. For the mentality of Spain, created in this very atmosphere during the medieval period, would eventually influence first the violent epic of the Crusades, and then the rest of the world as a result of the Spanish and Portuguese colonization in Africa, in Asia, and the Americas. Even before this period, because Spain was a bridge between Christian and Islamic domains, whatever occurred here in the way of ideology and scholarship vastly impacted both the history of Europe and the history of the Islamic world. This is a big deal. This is the microcosm that creates so much of the macrocosm of ideas that move into the modern era. So here we start. Mater Spania, right? So, located in the most favorable region in the world, according to Isidore of Sevilla. And of course, let's go to the first image. This was the proud Roman province of Tarraconosis. Carthaginosis, Beatia, Lusitania, and Galatia, the Cordoban Senecas, and the good emperors of Trajan and Hadrian. These are the famed Roman personalities of noble stock, originated in this land of horses and grapes and olives and rich natural resources. Spain was indeed a prize worthy of consideration. Let's go into the next image. And Rome held this honor, right? Beautiful, beautiful. Let's go to the next image. So you can see the marvel that was that was the Roman Spain. Buildings were monumental. You had temples and you had theaters and public baths and arenas and villas. This is Merida, right? This is in Spain. Uh, Quite prominent indeed, right? As time went on, let's go to the next image, another beautiful image. um, when Constantine initiated and then Theodosius completed the process of transforming a pagan state into a Christian empire, Spain joined the chorus of other religions upholding a Nicene faith and a Catholic world power, seemingly that was sanctioned by God. But the universal empire in the West began to crumble, and the lands of Roman Spain eventually fell to the Arians of Adrianople by the middle of the 6th century, centralizing their forces in Toledo. And so the Arian faith of the Visigoths kept these barbarians separate from the Latin Catholic majority. And so let's go to the next image. So we went to the grandeur, that which is Rome, to architecture like this. We moved to under the Visigoths, Spain went to more humble structures, and as opposed to monumental architecture, mostly churches. This is one of the earliest examples of this Visigoth architecture. It still uses Roman aspects. This is San Juan de Banos. It was built in 652, even though the inscription says it's around 657. This is in Cerrato, Palencia, right? Let's go to the next image. You also had built, this is the interior of this church. I mean, it is beautiful. You do have the arches on the columns, and it is a very solid building. Let's go to the next image. You also had San Pedro de la Nave. This is in Zamora. This is from the later part of the 7th century. It's a cruciform structure. Let's go to the next image. What I find is interesting in this capital shows Abraham, and he's grasping Isaac by the hair. He's right there in preparation to sacrifice him. But you can see also going to the left, the divine hand is pointing to the ram in the thicket, saying, "Hey, buddy, we're going to sacrifice the ram. We're not going to sacrifice your son." But this is typical of Visigothic style. It's very busy, very ornate with lots of curly cues. Let's go to the next image. You also have Santa Maria in Toledo. This is the biggest, I should say, the biggest early vaulted medieval church in Europe. Let's go to the next image. This is from the 8th century. And it's not completed fully. There's parts that are like the tower is not done, and many people say that the reason why that is the case is that the Visigoths were arriving, and as a result of that, they had to actually stop the construction of this particular building. Okay, thank you so much for showing that. All right, so the Visigoths brought with them their Arian faith. And of course, what is Arianism? What is it? We do have to talk about it pretty quickly. So here we go. So Basically, there's a guy by the name of Arius of Alexandria, and what he contended was that there was a time when the Son of God was not. There was a time, because after all, the argument goes as follows. You have a father and you have the son, right? So obviously, sons can't be as old as the father. They have to come second. And so, therefore, the procession goes father and then son. And as a result of that, there must be a time when the Son was not, that Jesus was not. And because of that idea, the perspective goes as follows. If there's a time when the Son was not, that means the Son is limited in some way. See how that works? And if the Son is limited in some way, that means that it cannot be absolutely immortal. He didn't start from the beginning of all time. And so therefore, he cannot be immortal, he cannot be even omnipotent. He is a creature of the creator. He is a man, or he has the spirit animating within him. So this is Arianism. And what happened is the Romans, you had the Council of Nicaea, and the Council of Nicaea basically said, oh, no, 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 no. The idea of Christ is co-equal with the Father. They are the same ousia, which translates as essence. They are homoousios. They are the same essence, the same stuff. Not one less than the other. And this is the decision of the Council of Nicaea under Constantine the Great. But the problem is that 3 years later, everybody changes their mind. The Roman Empire actually becomes Arian, especially under Constantine's son Constantius. Makes it Arian. In fact, the Nicene crowd, they're considered heretics. And so you have declarations against the Nicene Creed and so forth. Why is this important when it comes to the Visigoths? Well, it's important when it comes to the Visigoths because what happens is during this time in the mid part of the 4th century, the empire sends out missionaries. They sent out missionaries to, well, the Goths. And these are Arian missionaries. So the Goths then accept Arian Christianity. Well, lo and behold, the Roman Empire switches back to, hey, we're Nicene. We recognize the Nicene Council. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. And they do that in the year 381 at the Council of Constantinople. Well, guess what? Great. You just converted all these barbarians to another form of Christianity. So when the Western Roman Empire starts falling apart, and the Eastern for a little while, what happens is now you have these Arian Christians attacking Nicene Catholic Christians. And so there's like this huge opposition. One of these that held it very close and dear to their hearts, Arianism, happened to be the Visigoths. And so when they arrived in France and later on moved into Spain, guess what they're bringing with them? Yes, Visigoths, to a already Catholic majority. So that's it in short. It's a mess. So what happens, having gone there, right? Um, and so the Arian faith of the Visigoths kept these barbarians separate, as I said, from Latin Catholic majority. And so, guess what? Persecutions occurred periodically, especially during the reign of King Leovigild, who was reigned from 568 to 586. He was the great conqueror. As a result, obviously, the Visigoths were deemed as the enemy and the friend of all things unholy. This tainted image could have become their footnote entry amongst a long list of hostile marauders in the popular imagination if it had not been for a peculiar event that forced a paradigm change. And that, of course, will be the Third Council of Toledo. Holy Toledo, there's a council. And under King Ricard, who reigned from 586 to 601, who then renounced the Arian error and proclaimed the faith of Nicaea as well as Chalcedon. So it does kind of come to a happy ending, sort of. Okay. So two Spanish chroniclers look in to this particular history. One is John Biclaro, and the other is Isidore of Sevilla. And they had to make sense of what occurred at the Third Council of Toledo, since the longtime foe of the people's faith had now suddenly joined them in practice. And in a single moment, the convenient us and them metamorphized into just us. And suddenly the heretical invaders became the holy defenders of a unified Spain with God's special blessing. This recasting of the Visigoths into the protagonists of Spain necessitated a very creative process of historical writing and rewriting that influenced many Spanish historians even during the subsequent Islamic period. Well, John Biclaro was born in Lusitania. He studied in Constantinople between 559 to 576, gaining, while in the imperial capital, a firm grasp of the Byzantine ideology that ultimately identified the concept of an empire with church. This enabled him to transfer the symbols and powers associated with Constantine the Great and his Christian imperial successors over to any ruler that adopted the Orthodox faith and who seemed sanctioned by God to oversee a particular region through tangible demonstrations of power. Right? For instance, the success of Ricard's general, his name is Claudius, against 60,000 Franks. Apparently, they counted every one, right? With only a mere handful. Apparently, this is an exaggeration. Apparently, he defeated 60,000 Franks with 300 men. So, so what happened from there is that they would compare this with Gideon fighting against the Midianites. See, so it's like an Old Testament reoccurrence. Thus, the Visigoths became the people of God in the same tradition as Israel. Since success in war was accorded with divine favor in both the Jewish tradition and the Eusebian portrait of Constantine, John of Biclaro had to rehabilitate the figure of Ricard's staunch Arian father, Leovigild. Let's take a look at old Leovigild. Let's see what he looks like. This is not a very good likeness of him. I want to tell you ahead of time. Yeah, there he is. So, hi, Leovigild, um, who was well known as the greatest warrior king, but he's an Arian, and he did showcase a most impressive line of military victories. This required some effort since Liebegild's hostile onslaught against the Catholics, including, by the way, John's very own exile for a period of time in Barcelona, conveniently not mentioned in order to create a positive image, by the way. He had to be completely recast into something that's a lot better. Let's go to the next image. So, and his son, Ricard, uh, became there he is holding the globe of the earth with sword in hand. He became the revived image of the ruler Constantine the Great, whose presence illuminated the Holy Synod of Nicaea, says John. However, the king's third council of Toledo was portrayed as more effective because Arianism was cut at its root and was presented as bringing a Catholic peace in churches everywhere. This Christian Visigothic king was further depicted converting the Arians with, quote, the words of wisdom, using reason rather than force, and ultimately restoring the unity and peace of the Christian church. Unquote, by the way. It was all a quote. Okay. Well, let's go to the next image. Then you have, in a similar fashion to John of Biclaro, you have Isidore of Sevilla, writing in the early 7th century, utilized the historical formula of the universal chronicle style in the same tradition as Julius Africanus and Eusebius and Jerome and Prosper of Aquitine and Victor of Tudela. Unlike John's attempt to conceal the identity of the enemy troops fought in various engagements in the south of Spain, Isidore confidently reveals them as soldiers of the empire. Only now these Romans were the invaders against a legitimate Visigoth kingdom. Boy, a lot of revisionism going on here. Furthermore, their former Arianism was not of their own doing, but was blamed upon the Emperor Valens, who sent Arian missionaries to convert them. And so, quote, with this pernicious seed, he infused a deadly poison into this excellent people, which they had trustedly accepted, unquote. For Isidore, the Visigoths' right to rule Spain was earned through their valor in warfare, and what greater prize for all their effort than the bounty of Spain itself? Why, so, um, let's take this image down. Another reflective of this period of religious transition is the life of Masana, contained in the lives of the fathers of Merida, and portraying the period of persecution of Catholics by Arians before Toledo. Uh, John Macaro mentions Masana as a bishop of Merida in 573. However, while the figure is real, he is real, and the work is based on historical events, the general style follows the pattern set by various martyrologies and is so prone to some exaggeration. In many ways, the themes expressed in the life of Masana echo the kind of persecutions suffered by the early Christians at the hands of the Roman emperors. Furthermore, it was written after Toledo, the council, and so could freely assail and villainize the Arians without fear of repercussions, because now they're cast as the bad guys with the black hats, because you're safely out of that period of time. He can write whatever he wants to. The life of Masana also exhibits the belief that Satan favors the views unsubscribed by the narrator. In this hagiography, full of allusions to earlier lives of the martyrs, the Catholic Merida, and a devoted servant of the local saint Alulia, is pitted against, quote, the savage, cruel king of the Visigoths, the Arian Livigild, shown as a holy vessel of wrath. I'm reading from it, by the way, if you're wondering where I'm getting these words. A fomenter of vice. A fomenter of vice. That's a good one. And held captive by the cunning servant. At one point, the mad king flew into a rage with rabid yelping of his foaming mouth against the servant of God. You gotta love, the descriptive aspects. You can almost like see the foam in an attempt to steal away the holy tunic of Eulalia and to bring the relic to Toledo as an instrument of Satan in this version. Leovigild attempted various diabolical schemes to force Masana to convert to Arianism, and later, through the influence of the Arian bishop of Merida, Suna, who's described as the bringer of death, to dislodge him from his episcopal say. As you have noticed, I am quoting much from this document, and I'm kind of sprinkling these words through my own, so you get an idea of the feeling of this particular life of Masana. The author of the Life of Masana does not hesitate from evoking the most lurid and sinister expressions in his attempt to villainize the Arians. Once again, by direct correlation, God is presented as the side of the Catholics, while the Arians are considered the devil's possession. It's very simplistic, dualistic ideas that goes all the way back to Zoroastrianism. You got to have the bad guys, you got to have the good guys, and it is a simplistic mindset that buys into that. I'll just say that. Okay, so it's not very nuanced, and unfortunately, the people he's writing for are not as sophisticated as you would wish, and so this becomes very popular because they're needing to have a bad guy. Why? Because things are chaotic. Things are terrible. I mean, you saw how wonderful Rome was. Now, all of a sudden, everything, the infrastructure is falling apart. There's corruption everywhere. We got to have a bad guy to make us feel better. Let's make one out of those who are the Aryan Visigoths. But fortunately, now everything is just great. All right, maybe we're learning too much in this talk. Let's keep on going. So, as summarized, prior to the Council of Toledo in 589, the Visigoth presence in Spain, while grasping the diadem of power, lacked the faith of the Catholic majority. Because of this recognized defect by their subjects, true unity could not be achieved. We also discussed from the evidence drawn from Isidore of Sevilla and the life of Massana that it was not as if attempts were not made by these invaders to encourage the growth in influence of Arianism amongst the local population. But that local population wasn't buying it. These strategies to convert the local population to Arianism were often violent because you couldn't do it the soft way, although perhaps not as violent as depicted in the life of Masana, and maybe probably less foaming at the mouth. Yet now we must ponder the pure nature of this Catholic faith that supposedly won the day, before and after the arrival of the Visigoths. For evidence from Martin of Braga demonstrates that the Spanish church had to contend with a pagan past that was still alive and thriving in many regions, as well as the threat of heterodoxy to the ideal of religious unity. So we're jumping to another interesting topic, and that is Martin of Braga, 520 to 580. He's originally born in Pannonia. He devoted himself to the solitary life as a monk in Palestine, and then went on to pursue an active mission to convert the Suevi from their Arian beliefs, at which task he was successful, as well as work amongst the still very pagan population of Galicia. Martin was also dedicated to the establishment of monasticism in northern Spain, especially at Domio. Eventually, Martin's efforts were noticed and he was promoted to the Archbishop of Braga. His religious contributions included vigorous opposition to the local habit of single rather than triple immersion at baptism, and his devotion to popularizing the cult of St. Martin of Tours, a saint that died in 397. He was well regarded for his literary output, but yeah, sometimes they call him Spain's Seneca. But pagan elements. So what are people believing in Galicia at this time? Well, so this is where we get into academics and scholars talking about what they believe in. So I'm kind of going now outside the primary sources, but what's going to happen was we're going to primary sources, but archaeological primary sources and other sources outside of Catholic sources. But what's going to happen is then we're going to go jump back into Braga and you'll see all the connections. That's why I want to do this. So you can see, oh, okay, everything starts lining up. Here we go. Galician beliefs. Basically, it's a blend of Celtic, Roman, and Iberian influences. I mean, there we know there are megaliths that cross over this region, demonstrating that they believe so much in the sacredness of these stones. Um, you also have those who are called the Muros. You guys know what a Muros is? Anyway, Muros. This is a supernatural race. According to, it's very interesting because there are connections, if you can feel it, with other Celtic beliefs, including Irish folklore. The Muros, they are the supernatural race, and there's something that happens that forces them to flee beneath the earth. And they dwell here, and they live near these long burrows of earth. Sometimes they're made out of timber, sometimes out of stone, sometimes just out of ground. It's pounded down, with mallets. So, also they occupy these hilltop holy places, but just beneath the ground. So connections to the underworld, connections to the overworld above, and they have treasures. They not only connect to the treasures of gold and silver and jewels, but they also are really good at forging them into these beautiful ornamental works, right? But they guard them too, right? Now, they are protected in many ways, oftentimes by what is called a coulebre. A coulebre basically is a giant bat-winged serpent or a dragon. Is this intriguing to you guys? Maybe. Um, it's a protector of the treasure, just like the dragon protects treasures. This is the same kinds of story that we have all over the place from Indra, right? So because Dindra, of course, fights the great Asura who's guarding the treasure of the monsoons, all right? Or Taranis, the Hittite, sky god attacking Ilyakus, who's guarding the treasure. Or hey, you got Thor, right? To the serpent of Middle Earth, And of course, this will eventually go into stories that relate to dragons guarding treasures. And the god will end up becoming a knight, and then sometimes that treasure is a fair maiden. Well, they have the same kinds of stories kind of threaded through it. And so you're going to have the giant winged bat winged serpent protecting the treasure. They are immortal, but sometimes they're kind of scary, and they attack and they capture those known as the Anyanas. And you're looking at me like, what's an Anyana? Anyana are female fairies. That's the best way to describe them. So they're called Anyanas amongst them, these peoples. They're called Zanas in Asturias. They're called Ianis in Leon, and they're called Lamias in the Basque region. So hey, we found so these are female fairies. What's interesting is these are always good. They're always protectors, and this is why apparently this bat-winged dragon is capturing them, right? And so we have lots of stories connected to them. What I find is interesting, I'm going to just throw this. This has nothing to do with the lecture. I think it's interesting. Is the Anyanas was used for women who practiced magic in these regions, and it was synonymous to the idea of a witch in a positive sense. And that was also true with Asturias and Leon on the Basque region. And then when the idea, remember the word witch is an Anglo-Saxon word. It's not. I mean, it's not in these languages. But when you start getting a negative connotation for women who are doing magical acts, then this word is taken away from them. And so I think that's interesting in and of itself too. The Ayanas, they are within this particular region, the Galician region. They are looked at as connected to the spirit of trees somehow. So they're connected to. So they are fairies, but connected to trees, which is interesting because the Zanas, who are of the Asturias region, they're not just the trees, they're connected to also being spirits of the water. And they're very beautiful. And the ones in Asturias, they're connected to a goddess that when the Romans come along, it's adopted that they're connected to the goddess Diana or Artemis. So I find that as interesting too. So yeah, we're having lots of fun here, aren't we? So these are some of the localized beliefs. By the way, with Christianization, the Anyanas are said to be sent by God to do good things, and so you're going to see parallels here with the idea of, in Islam, you have the jinn, you got good jinn, you got bad jinn, you got the trickster jinn. And what's going to happen is they fit under the good jinn. So they're still spirit beings, they still exist, but they help out. So anyway, I mean, you also have the Onyaku, who are basically giant cyclops that are 10 to 20 feet tall. So yeah, lots of fun. Let's go to an image here. Let's see some things. They also worship various gods. This is Urudenis. And this is an altar, dates from around 161. We don't know much about this deity. Let's go to the next image. This is known as today as the Fountain of the Idol. This is in Braga, North Portugal, from the first century. And you see human figures with a human bust. It's carved out of a granite outcrop, so you got that. And let's go to the next one. And so, of course, you'd also have these other images that we are not fully sure what they represent. Some kinds of deities or something that is protective of some sort. So there you have it. Okay, you can take them down. Thank you so much. All right. So what happens now is we have Martin. Yeah, we're back to Martin. So what Martin was going to do is he's going to expose these pagan elements, which were everywhere in Spanish Christianity. In many ways, Martin echoes the style of various patristic treatises against Greco-Roman religion, such as found in the writings of Tatian and Theophilus of Antioch and Clement of Alexandria. Following this literary standard, Martin both attempted to uncover the so-called malignant roots of idolatry throughout history and the general character of the gods and nature spirits as either formed from the tales of wicked men or as disguised demonic forces orchestrated by Satan. Uh, as conventional as this approach may sound, the effect of using this well-recognized and regarded patristic model could only further bolster confidence in Martin's claim from the vantage point of very conservative majority that these simple rustic superstitions and remnants of paganism posed a great threat, as much as the dominating Greco-Roman beliefs in the days of the early church fathers. So he's making a parallel. Martin's demonization further extends to topics more relevant to his day. For instance, Martin condemns, quote, such disbelievers that place the very names of the demons on each day of the week. So you can't do that. Uh, you guys do know that further north, those names still stand. The gods are still in the names. And, just last I checked of Tuesday and Wednesday and all right, Thursday. But anyway, down here, he's saying, I can't believe they're doing it. These rustics, he calls them, and infidels are presented as vulnerable and ignorant and easy prey for demons that preside over the sea. He mentions streams, fountains, and forests. So there is a reference to the animistic beliefs that we just talked about earlier. He explains that superstitious folk were even unable to know how to fortify themselves with the sign of the cross. Oh no, which is a sure sign to ward off evil spirits. It's like, yeah, so as long as they're able to do this, then they're able to. Well, isn't that a anyway? Martin seeks to bring into sharp focus the exact nature of the errors, since apparently from the Galatians' local setting, the definition of what is Christian in tradition had become confused with pagan elements. He allots even some of the so-called baptized Christians amongst who light candles besides rocks and trees and fountains and at crossroads, and who observe divinations and auguries and days of idols, as well as those who pour fruit and wine on a log in the hearth as being problematic. So once again, you're getting an eyewitness, a contemporaneous eyewitness to the practices of the Galatians, and I find that interesting, right? Even if it's covered with all this rhetoric. For Martin, these rustics had fallen. In Martin's opinion, the key to unity was, of course, rejected for the sign of Satan and so forth. And so there it goes on, but you get the idea. All right, let's get to the next image. So finally, let's talk about the Council of Toledo. Yeah, unity was achieved, right? By the condemnation of Arianism as a heresy, as the writings of John of Biclaro and Isidore of Sevilla demonstrate so well. The council made it clear that the Visigoths were brought to the unity of the Church of Christ through the over influence of divine will, only by the direct intervention of God himself, who joined such an illustrious people, he says, to the unity of true faith and established one flock and one shepherd. I mean, this is just, supposed to be good news, right? Leander vigorously upholds the idea of the unity of nations as foretold by the prophets. I mean, he says, "Rejoice, therefore, to the Lord." So it's considered a great moment. But let's go to the next image. Unfortunately, while supposedly the true Catholic faith was restored, you got to find another enemy. Remember, you just lost the Arians as an enemy, right? You can't, now the Arians are no longer Arians; they're all Catholic. But you got to find a bad guy. Unfortunately, this is so much part of the history of Spain. It drives me crazy. So who are the bad guys now? This is going to be very upsetting. The Jews. So they just switched. They go all that. They went from fighting against the Arians to, oh. So unfortunately, the Council of Toledo revived the old Roman anti-Jewish legislation, severely limiting the community's freedom. And so you have Sesebut later on proceeds further and gave the Jews an ultimatum: convert or leave. By the period of the Visigothic Code, which you see right here, but a later version of it, the king, Razathuth, pronounced that while the virtue of God, by the sword of the word, extirpated all other heresies, root and branch, we have to lament that the soil of our kingdom is still only defiled by the infamy of the Jews, unquote. And so we believe that in order to, quote, establish peace in our realm, he had to put an end to ancient errors, including Judaism, unquote. Okay, let's see me for a few moments. Okay, this is heartbreaking, right? Uh, always needing an enemy, always needing a bad guy, always looking for even an enemy within in order to bring together fellow believers. Why can't they hold together through love and kindness and compassion? Why can't they even look into some of the Sermon on the Mount, right? What I find is so interesting is that so often warring Christian cultures do not tend to like the New Testament very much in their iconography. You go into churches, it's like, oh, it's Old Testament again. They like the Old Testament God because it seems to support so much in the way of bloodshed. And this is what's happening here. We found our bad guys, and then we'll use illustrations from the Old Testament connected to the Canaanites and others to support their claims. It's ridiculous. So, once again, the price of unity required a rhetorical scapegoat. It, in a forced effort to convert Jews to Christianity, they were forbidden to observe their festival days, the Passover and the Sabbath, as well as their dietary restrictions, and circumcision became illegal. This is an effort to dislodge community bonds between them. In addition, their roles in public life were severely curtailed, prohibited from testifying against Christians in court, or to receive defense. No defense. Unlike the gentle conversion of the Arians and the patient instructions provided by Martin of Brega in respect to rustics living in Galicia, the Jews, now a powerless minority, had to face persecution unless they denied their faith. However, this isolation did not have the desired effect, and the Jews continued to thrive in Spain, and even more so with the arrival of the Muslims who stopped the persecutions. Right? It ends. Thus, while the Third Council of Toledo symbolizes the final realization of Christian unity in 589, undeniably, of course, a momentous event in the religious and political history of Spain, those attending the council believed it was necessary to identify a further threat arising from the Jews, which eventually culminated in the Visigothic Code. This constant need to unveil a specter bent upon destroying unity is an intriguing aspect of this age, along with the rampant insecurity that necessitated the creation of a harmful, dividing exterior force in the popular imagination. In theory, after the Third Council of Toledo, various local apologists considered Visigoth Spain as another extension of the universal Christian empire, carefully grafted on following the barbarians' conversion to Catholicism from Arianism. The Visigothic kings even began to act out the role as good Christian Roman emperors, presiding at church councils, codifying revisions of Roman law, and even covering their cities with sculpted works, inscribing epigrams even in shining marble, as the case of, for example, Wamba between 672 to 80 he reigned, or at Toledo. Not that conditions return to a prosperous imperial period, as obvious by the continual decline in the communication infrastructure and the, well, erratic, sometimes violent politics of Visigoth kings, but at least a semblance of continuity was recognizable in a modified form. However, however, that illusion was shattered by the dramatic and unexpected arrival of very different invaders from the south. These, they were called Ishmaelites by the people there, or Moors. That comes from the Roman word Mori, which means from Mauritania, the name of the province in that area. That's where you get the word Moors. They possessed odd customs and subscribed to unusual beliefs, including one that will be understood as Islam. Not much time elapsed before the reality became evident that this was not a temporary scourge, a momentary judgment of God inflicted upon a disobedient people to punish it or to purify them, their transgressions. These Arab warriors and Berber tribesmen, they were here and they were here to stay. Admittedly, at the time of the Muslim arrival, by the way, I want to say before I jump into this, oh, I really want to say this. This falls in line with forbidden knowledge. This is stuff that most people don't know. This is wonderful stuff that Kenneth Wolf shared with the class, and we went through the Latin documentation. So it's thank you, Ken, for doing this. But because the picture you're going to hear and the sources you're going to hear are hardly ever talked about, and it is very controversial. Okay, so here we go. Admittedly, at the time of the Muslims' arrival, Spain was embroiled in a huge dispute. Let's go to this image. Next image. Especially over King Rodrigo, also known as Ruderick. According to the Chronicle of 754, Roderick tumultuously, a tumultus, it says in Latin, invaded the kingdom or regnum with the encouragement, or maybe I could translate as exhortation of the Senate around 710. That means that this palace coup was violent enough to divide the kingdom into factions, with one side in favor and another side against this action. Archaeological evidence, especially from coins minted at the time, which you're seeing, revealing that Roderick controlled the southwestern Spain, including Lusitania and western Carthagenesis, up to his capital at Toledo, while northeastern Spain was under a certain Aquila. I just want you to understand that this is the setup. There is indeed what's going on, a civil war. Okay. Okay, let's go to the next image. Because because of this disagreement, when these infidels defeated the Visigothic king Rodrigo at Guadalete on July 19th, 711, that's 711, like the Slurpee, right? Many Christians living in the kingdom believed he illegitimately occupied his office anyway, that he was not legitimate. It's a civil war. So they're not for him. Now it gets even more confusing. However, regardless of his title, Rodrigo's defeat by the governor of North Africa's lieutenant by the name of Tarak was so complete that nothing stood between him and the possession of the rest of Spain. Without too much difficulty, Tarak defeated the last of the Visigothic army at Iquia and continued on to conquer Cordoba, Granada, Malaga, traveling towards Toledo. Unexpectedly, Tarak was assisted by many Christians who had grown weary of the inconsistent and often violent Visigothic rule. They desired a regime, any regime, that could provide Spain with stability. What? You mean, so you got a civil war? They'll never tell you this. You got a big civil war going on. They don't like the guy that's who's claiming to be in charge. And here comes the Muslims, and they're looked at as saving the day. It gets even more interesting. I need names. I'll give you names. The Christian count by the name of Julian supplied Tarik with guides that led the Muslim army along the ancient Toledo route. Okay. The displaced sons of the previous king by the name of Witza, he was king between 702 to 710. They had little loyalty to King Rodrigo. They see him as a usurper. They immediately betrayed him, swear allegiance to Tarak, and received in return all their ancestral estates lost in the previous confusion. From a material point of view, the Witza family greatly benefited from this agreement. In fact, they served as counts and judges of the Christians in Toledo, Sevilla, and Cordoba until the 10th century. They won. In fact, in class, he brought in a whole list of all the names in Latin of all the Christian families. That's what, yay, they're saving the day. Tarik is saving the day, but they're Muslims, but they're still saving the day. Uh, so maybe that tells you how bad things were in Visigothic Spain, right? Again, you're not going to hear this. You know, people don't want to hear this information. So as a result of that, so basically, as to be expected, the Jews, of course, also greeted the Muslims with enthusiasm, oftentimes betraying their hosts in the process because they're getting freedom. So you have this weird situation where the Muslims are coming to save the day. According to who? According to them, the Spanish living there. Let's take this image down for a few moments. So I think we're learning too much now. We can see why this is a dangerous talk. Let's keep on going. An unusual twist characterizes this conquest of Spain by the Muslims. Since Tarik, by the way, he was not ordered to engage in a full-scale campaign. What? No, he was supposed to only have a small military engagement. It was supposed to be a small cleanup action, a little bit of piracy. That's it. The problem is that when he arrived, everybody opened their gates to him, going, "Save us!" He was like, he's just doing some piracy, but he saw the opportunity right there before him. He go, "Oh, I can't refuse this." Musa, who is the governor of Ifrica, that's the northern part of Africa, was outraged. The governor who sent him there was angry at Tarak for doing this, for his insubordination. And he fretted over the possibility that he would claim also all the credit now that he was able to accomplish this. So in June of 712, Musa, the governor of Ifrica, arrived at the port of Garicus and began conquering Tarik's leftovers, including Carmona, Sevilla, and Merida, with an Arab army 1,800 strong. Finally, near Talveria, Musa, quote, met Tarik, whom he struck in the head with his riding crop, upbraiding him for insubordination and greed, unquote, from that time. He's so mad at him, he hits him with his riding crop. You were not supposed to conquer Spain. It was supposed to be a piracy mission, a cleanup action, nevertheless. But it wasn't for the enthusiastic reception from the people who cannot stand the Visigoths for some reason, right? And how they're running things. They prefer to have Muslims over them. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Oh, don't worry. We're going to dissect this even further. Oh no, I'm going to give you sources, too many sources, but why not? We move on. So, what happens now? The campaign continued with the fall of Tharagossa. I want to say it the way they say it in Tharagossa, right? The Philip version. In the spring of 714, in various conquests along the Duero River, Tariq sent forces to conquer Barcelona, and after this goal was achieved around 717, the Muslim army continued on towards Gaul. However, Musa's role in these campaigns were cut short. He was recalled to the Caliph of Damascus. Remember, this whole area is under the Umayyads. The Umayyad Caliphate extends all the way, well, now from Spain all the way across North Africa, all including what is now Turkey, of course, Egypt, going into the entire Middle East, all the way to Iran. So it's pretty big. It's a huge chunk, and it's all under the caliph. So all this is being conquered, in support of the caliph. So they're called back. So Musa's role in the campaigns cuts. By the way, Tariq is also called back. I won't talk too much about him. They actually return, and when they return back to Damascus, Musa's all excited because he has all these treasures. He wants to have a triumphant entry, but the caliph was sick, and his brother took over. And he says, "Hey, maybe we should wait until my brother's better, and then you can have your triumphal march with all your spoils through the gates of Damascus." But really, his brother wants to grab the goods. He wants to take credit for it. So what happens is, long and short of it uh, is Musa does it anyway. It goes against the brother's orders, and you can see where the mess goes on. And when his when the other one is the brother is returned, there's a huge mess, huge misunderstanding or an understanding, and eventually Musa loses his rank because he's too popular as a result of that, and everybody loves him. And one thing a caliph doesn't like, and that's competition. Okay, moving right along. That's a side. So what happens now is that Musa's not around, so who's going to be in charge? His son. His son, Abd al-Aziz, becomes in charge of the war against the Christians. They say it, and so he becomes the first governor of Spain. He settled down in Sevilla, making the city his capital, where he was murdered in 716. And of course, you're going to ask the question: um, why was he murdered? What happened? Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you why. Once again, you're going to have some fun here, or not having fun, but the details of this reveal so much. So, the son of Musa, Abd al-Aziz, this murder illustrates a lot about the Muslim early encounter of Christian culture in Spain. You see, Abd al-Aziz's demise came about because of his infatuation with degenerate Christian customs of Spain. Of course, I'm quoting Muslim chroniclers on this one. A crime in the minds of these still very zealous invaders, at least the Berber side of the equation. According to Ibn Abd al-Hakam, I gave you my source, Abd al-Aziz, quote, married a Christian lady, a daughter of King of Andalus called Roderick, whom Tariq had killed, unquote. And, quote, she brought him a large fortune which exceeded all description, unquote. Now, the marriage to Egolana roused considerable suspicion, especially since she convinced Abd al-Aziz to adopt various Christian trappings of royalty. Ibn al-Hakim quotes Egolana as saying, why do I not see people of thy kingdom respect thee and bow to thee? As my father's subjects were wont to respect him and bow to him. So, in response, Abd al-Aziz built a low door at the side of his palace that forced those seeking his audience to stoop beneath the lintel before entering his presence, and thus technically bowing before their lord. This is kind of a clever little trick. What is interesting is that Ibn Abd al-Hakam states, quote, the people heard that he made the door only for that purpose, and some conjectured that she made him a Christian. Unquote. What? So, for the newly arrived Muslims of Spain, any compromise in custom by their leaders necessarily meant conversion to the Christian faith. If you looked and acted like a Christian, you were a Christian. This would change in the centuries past when the Christians of Andalusia actually resembled their fellow Muslims in almost every way. We'll talk about that in exterior. But for now, distinctions between the two populations had to be enforced. Al-Aziz paid the price for his failure to conform to his fellow Muslims, violated their expectations, and was slain in the former church, which, take a look at the former church there, at the former church of Santa Rufina, which would now have become the main mosque in Sevilla, while he's doing his nightly prayer. Of course, once again, it is, again, the church of Santa Rufina. Okay, that's good. Thank you for showing that. And without doubt, the Muslims did enforce what is known as the Pact of Umar in regards to Christians living in Spain. This was originally issued by Umar I following the conquest of Palestine and Syria in 637. This pact asserts that Christians would refrain from displaying crosses on their churches or even to show the symbol on the street while within public view. Bells to call Christians to worship were now replaced with wooden clappers struck lightly so as not to offend passing Muslims. Christian processions were to be stripped of all images, palm branches, and even lighted candles, and had to be conducted in absolute silence. Christians were absolutely forbidden to possess arms of any kind and were to dress in a style apart from their Muslim neighbors, forced to wear girdles around their waists, and absolutely restricted from wearing silk. Christians could not spread the gospel message, nor were they allowed to build any new churches, cells, or hermitages, or even repair the old structures. These restrictions were strict, unbending, cruel, and largely ignored after the initial conquest. And so this is you have the ideal, despite the outward lip service to the Pact of Umar and sometimes fanciful religious rhetoric in later chronicles. The conquest of Spain by Muslims was not always as violent and disruptive of life as been depicted in various modern histories. As already noted, many Christians actually aided or complied with the Muslim conquerors, for instance, the sons of King Witza and Count Julian. And this is clearly seen in yet another document, which I'm going to be going through, called the Treaty of Tudmir. Here we have an Arabic document dating from 713. 713. The invasion is 711. 713. This is only, a couple years later. 2 years. Here we have an Arabic document, right? That was a pact between a Christian ruler, and it was concluded in a peaceful resolution. This peace treaty was made between the controversial Abd al-Aziz and the Christian ruler of Murcia by the name of Theudemir. Now, the agreement promises not to, quote, set special conditions for Theodemir, nor harass him or remove him from power. That's the first part. It's possibly reflecting either local fears or rumors of Muslims conducting towards the conquered or representing earlier strategies of conquest by the Muslims. The treaty also agrees not to kill the followers of Theodemir or to take them prisoner, nor will they be separated from their women and children. Wow. Furthermore, they will not be coerced in matters of religion. Their churches will not be burned, nor will their sacred objects be taken from their realm, so long as he, Theodemir, remains sincere and fulfills the following conditions we have set for him. Okay, so nothing like all the rhetoric of later ages and a good old document from that time. This is where I get a little distraught at times that people just don't like primary sources because they become inconvenient. They do. They go against what is the rhetoric that we see, that the spin later on, because you'll see the spin later on by Christian chroniclers during the Middle Ages. They'll go look, all these terrible things are happening, and then you find this, right? So Christians were now organized in protected groups known as dhimmis under Muslim law, and they received their rights of residence in return for paying a special tax. That's called a jizya, which was levied on able-bodied adult males of military age. So that's the jizya tax. Now, although during although dating somewhat after the event, I'm gonna let's go through this because I think this is I love going through all of medieval Spain. This is important. This is really important. So I want to go a little bit further, and then we'll get out. We'll keep going. Although dating somewhere after the event, two accounts of this Muslim invasion need to be examined here. One by Ibn Abd al-Hakim from the Arab perspective, and the other by the Latin historian of what's called the Chronicle of 754. Now, remember, this event happened in 711 and was still happening, so this is pretty good. So it must be conceded that both of the accounts still were far enough from the events of 711 to gain a certain advantage in hindsight. The closer of the two to this conquest was the unknown author of the Chronicle of 754. He seems to have been an ecclesiastical official of some kind and familiar with the Muslim court at Cordoba. Um, Kenneth Wolfe, quoting him, notes he expressed himself in ways that sound very Arabic, in particular when he described Spain as a pomegranate, like that, or referred to the Frankish troops at Tours as immobile, holding together like a glacier in the cold regions. That's good, unquote. In addition, the chronicler seems unaccustomed to typical northern war protocols, viewing the Franks sheathing of their swords for the night in order to resume fighting in the morning as absolutely despicable. That's not what you do in amongst Muslims and in southern areas. Yet the Ishmaelites secret retreat at night to avoid a morning battle, which would be considered an act of cowardly by most Germanic standards, receives little critical scrutiny. And in fact, he presents the overall ploy of the Muslim troops abandoning their empty tents, still arranged as if they were still occupying them, as a rather clever trick played upon by the Europeans. So once again, a different perspective. Keeping this in mind, we have to be careful about assuming that this author's full cultural identity as European, even though he wrote in Latin. While clearly a Christian in faith, his various prejudices and lens through which he views the world is from an orientation of people that recently crossed the straits into Spain. Clearly, the language and culture of the Muslims already heavily influenced him, even if he was a Christian. So already we're seeing in his writings how he understands things. Even though he's a Christian, there seems to be perspectives that are very much invested from those who came from the South. Already in 754, things are changing. And we have the evidence right here. Now, the other one, Ibn al-Hakim, wrote much later. He's from the mid-9th century or mid-800s. He's a native of Egypt. He was a traditional historian and viewed Spain as an extension of political situations in North Africa, at times even forgetting about Spain as a topic, right? Unlike the chronicler, who at least had the advantage of living in the place of his respective subject, Ibn al-Hakim was forced to rely on select Arab historians. So you have that. And he kind of synthesizes them all together. Okay, so as difficult as it may seem, both authors attempt to portray their material in a balanced way and in their descriptions of themselves. And, the result is they seem to correlate. They do in many different ways. Um, and so what happens here is, I'll go through it. So um, in their accounts, the fall of Visigothic Spain, for example, occurs as a result of the general disorder of the country at that time. They agree on that. And the overwhelming greed of the Arabs and Moors who found such a prize too tempting to resist. They agree on that. So they agree that both the Visigoths messed everything up, and that the Muslims are greedy. And they agree on this. King Roderick was an illegal usurper in the Latin Chronicle, and he's guilty of impregnating the daughter of Ilyan, the governor of El Qadra, along the Straits, according to the Muslim version, and he requests Tariq to cross over to avenge him, according to the Muslim historian as well. So there's a little added detail from a Muslim perspective. It's kind of like, yeah, but he's so bad, he did this terrible deed. And so Tariq is coming again to the rescue. Well, in both cases, he is a wretched character. He's a bad guy. They both agree. And sometimes that's the beginning. Agree what you're against. Well, then again, it gets into a messiness. We'll go there. While the Chronicle deplored the destruction of beautiful Spanish cities and the slaughter of many youths and infants, although admitting that those cities that wished for peace were, quote, granted their request without delay. So it's like, well, if they gave up, nothing was done to them. Providing a reasonable context for the Treaty of Tudmar, Ibn al-Hakim condemned the unjust amounts of spoils placed on the ships by these very looters and viewed the sinking of such overladen vessels as an act of divine justice, whether or not they hung about them copies of the Quran like ornaments to protect themselves. So once again, there's a lot in the way of agreement. Okay, so so you get the idea. So now I think I cemented in our understanding of the conquest of Spain, and that's kind of a standalone. Let's keep on going. So, following the conquest of 711, most of Spain was under Muslim domination, except for a narrow strip of land along the Bay of Biscay and the rugged Pyrenees. Here, a remnant of Christians held out against the Arabs and Moors, a testimony to their stubborn resolve and the strength, as much as, of course, the invaders' lack of interest in getting that area, which is not very great for cultivation, at least at that time. But there you have it. And so you have the tradition of rebels standing out. Here we go. So you got to create a legend. Let's watch this legend being created, shall we? So this tradition was shaped and molded over a period of time. And so eventually, those in this area, the Pyrenees Mountains, in this little strip, slowly but surely, through rhetoric, pain, and process, they eventually try to make connections with these groups of people in the previous Visigothic kingdom. We're going to work on this. They're going to work on it. So what happens is, as they carefully link this to the Christian Visigothic kingdom, eventually Asturias was perceived as its natural extension, especially by the reign of Alfonso II, which is 791 to 842. But you got a problem here. You got 711 and you got 791. We got to do some work here, right? And so what happens now is that we got to create some kind of idea. So let's go to the next image. So the Asturians come up and they trace their lineage back to a certain Pileo, who basically is Pelagius, which, by the way, means from the sea. And so he is forged as an early Christian adversary of the Muslims in Spain. However, he's not mentioned at all in the Chronicle of 754. In fact, Pelagius is only first mentioned in the 9th century Chronicle of Abelda. By the time of the Chronicle of Alfonso III, this local mountain rebel was identified as the sword bearer of the kings Witza and Roderick, who gathered a renegade Christian army at the threshold of his cave hideout on Mount Asuva. Let's go to the next image. Okay, Mount Asuva. Oh yeah, this is some of the conquests right here. Oh yeah, actually, Mount Asuva, and defeated the Muslim forces sent to annihilate him. So the Battle of Cova Donga, which was said to happen around May 28th, 722, is the centerpiece of the Chronicle of Alfonso III, where basically, next image, where catapulted stones from the enemy, drawing too near to the nearby shrine of the Virgin Mary, miraculously returned to their original shooters, while an earthquake shook the remnant of the Arab troops from the mountain and down into the river below. Uh, by the way, comparable in the author's opinion to the salvation of the children of Israel from the forces of Pharaoh by the parting of the Red Sea. Hearkening to biblical correlations between the Christian army and the Israelites, the Chronicle of Alfonso III also reaches back to the more recent past, connecting Pelagius and his successors of the kingdom of Asturias with the Christian Visigoths. He states plainly to Opa, the treacherous bishop of Toledo, who happened to accompany the Muslim army, that the quote, the well being of Spain and the army of the Gothic people will be restored, since the church of God is compared to a mustard seed that will be raised again through divine mercy, unquote. So now the direct association of the Visigoths with the idea of the church of God, it becomes a very interesting theme. It becomes, in fact, mentioned frequently. For instance, at one point, the destruction of Muslim armies by the earthquake is viewed as an expected result of, quote, Arabs who are persecuting the church of God. And another place, following the defeat, it is proclaimed that the, quote, the country was populated and the church was restored. For this author, the church of God and the Visigoths were one and both lived on through the kingdom of Asturias. We have therefore created a legend and a connection. Congratulations. It worked, right? But yeah. So let's keep on going. Let's take down the image. So with the resumed restoration, the author of the Chronicle of Alfonso III and the Chronicle Prophetica, which is from 883, realized that they had a problem. It's a restoration. What's being restored? Oh no. So you have to have something destroyed in order to have something restored. And so they have to come up with a fall. So what will happen is that in all probability, the two works are written, Chronicle of Alfonso III and the Chronica Prophetica, were actually written during the early part of the reign of Alfonso III, in 866 to 910, when hopes were high that the recent successes experienced by the Asturians against the Muslims would continue at the same rate through their newly achieved divine favor. For the Chronicle of Alfonso III, these transgressions were particularly prevalent in characters like the Visigoth king Witza, who was disgraced in his habits, took too many wives and concubines, and ordered bishops, priests, and deacons to take wives. This was the cause of Spain's ruin, right? The Chronicle Prophetica asserted that all beauty of the Gothic people, perished through both panic and the sword, because worthy penance was not done amongst them for their sins, and so the Lord forsook them as they forsook the precepts of the Lord. So you got to now dig back. You got a hero champion over things. You got to have some kind of moral reason why he is championing the day. Isn't it interesting how these histories have to stitch these stories up? How there's a need for this to happen. The belief that the Visigoths fell to the Muslims because of their lust and greed is still evident as early as Boniface's letter of abomination to King Ethelbald, which does date to 746-47. So there is that, but you're going to see this idea of a scourge being exemplified and focused upon. Okay, so now let's move on to the next bit here. Meanwhile, following the death of Abd al-Aziz, the center of Muslim control in Andalusia was transferred from Sevilla to Cordoba in 716. This is closer to Muslim Africa and a very, also very fertile region of Cordoba. It was also far away from Christian symbolism and the Visigothic royal legacy associated with Toledo. As the Muslims consolidated their power in Spain, they continued to expand northwards towards Gaul. Let's go to the next image. Following the fall of Barcelona in 717, yeah, there we have it. Let's go to the next image. And Narbonne, capital of Septimania, which fell, excuse me, in 720. And from the strategic location, the Muslims raided most of southern Gaul, including Carcassonne, Toulouse, Nimes, and even Autun in Burgundy. The spoils were rich, according to Ibn Abd al-Hakim. A certain Abd Aran even found a leg of gold adorned with pearls and emeralds, which was broken up, according to custom, into 5 parts, with 4 of the parts allotted to his men. Despite their defeat by Odo of Aquitaine, the Muslims quickly recovered, and by 725 posed a real threat once more along the French frontier. In 732, the Emir Abd al-Rahman left Pamplonia for Gaul. After defeating Odo of Aquitaine, he met Charles Martel at Tours, where he was killed, and his army completely defeated. The Battle of Tours was the beginning of the end for the Muslim northern advance. 2 years later, the Muslims were again on the move, seizing both Arles and Avignon. However, Charles Martel immediately checked this advance, and they were forced to retreat back to the Narbonne. Narbonne itself was conquered by Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, sometime between 751 to 759, and with the loss of Muslim rule in Septimania, you basically had any desires or needs, I should say, to go any further north. And of course, obviously, Charlemagne will be there soon. Okay. Meanwhile, next image. Muslim Spain itself underwent a period of ethnic strife between the Arabs who arrived with Musa and occupied the fertile regions about Cordoba, and the Berbers who first landed on Spanish soil with Tarak and ended up receiving the land that was, well, left over. For the most part, this land was poor in quality. The Arabs were in the habit of treating the newer, converted Berbers in an inferior manner, viewing them as unsophisticated in their customs and basic knowledge of Islam, even seeing them as worthy of disdain. Finally, the Berbers had enough of their unfair treatment, with the revolt breaking out at Tangiers, Morocco in 740. Here, Misera el Fakir from the Baghdad tribe became the leader of the Berbers and had himself declared as caliph. The Berbers then declared the Kharijite doctrine, in which all Muslims were equal, whether Arab or Berber. Civil war then broke out amongst the Berbers in northern Spain. The Caliph of the Umayyads in Damascus sent 30,000 Syrians to put down the Berber insurrection in Morocco. But these forces soon found themselves holed up at Ceuta. Realizing that he was unable to handle his own Berber revolt in Spain, El Malik ibn Qatan, the governor of Andalusia, gave permission for the Syrians, Balj and Talabad, to cross the straits in 741. These are the troops, of course, from the Caliph in Damascus, and voluntarily gave up his authority to them at Cordoba, for which kindness the Syrians actually threw him into prison. After the Syrians completed their intended task, defeating the Berbers around Toledo and Cordoba, well, the Syrians refused to leave. And so another conflict broke about. So this is not a time of stability. The Syrian, Balj, realizing that the indigenous Arab forces were heading for Cordoba, forced Imlak ibn Qatan into the main mosque, with hopes he would declare to all the gathered people that Balj, the Syrian, was a rightful representative of Andalusia as declared by the Caliph Kulthum. Instead, Imlak ibn Qatan declared, "O you people, I am the governor appointed by Kulthum, and I have been unjustly imprisoned." Well, immediately Balj cut off his head. In return, the Arab Habib, about to meet Balj in battle, sees Balj's Qadi or judge, tore out his eyes, cut off his hands and legs, hung him on a tree, and placed his trunk on the head of a swine. These are not good times. Habib subsequently defeated Balj, the Syrian, in battle. Finally, an easy peace was established in 742, with the caliph ordering a land distribution for all the Syrians from the Umayyad territories who wished to remain in Spain. Still, according to O'Callaghan, even after the suppression of the Berber rebellion, tribal hatreds amongst Arabs continued unabated and facilitated the seizure of power later on by the Umayyads in 756. So here we go. So um, let's go to the next image. So this is the Umayyad. Um, the Umayyads, of course, the Caliphate. Look at all the territory they had from 661 to 750. The center of its control is Damascus, which is in Syria. And you can see they had everything from Spain all the way to Iran, all the way down the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa. It's all theirs. Well, there is an uprising. And so what happens is the Umayyads are overthrown and the Abbasids take over. So let's go to the next image. And the Abbasids take over the caliphate. And it's hard to see this here, but what they do is they make Baghdad or this area around Iraq the center instead. And of course, that changes things quite a bit. Let's go to the next image. But one of the Umayyads escaped, and that is Abd al-Rahman. So a major turnabout happens on May 15th, 756, when Abd al-Rahman, a prestigious exile of the Umayyads, he runs and he defeats the governor of Al-Andalus, Yusuf al-Fahir, at Cordoba. Regardless of the fact that the Abbasids were currently in control of the caliphate, Abd al-Rahman now was recognized as the emir of Cordoba, acknowledged no such dynasty, and ruled Andalus with hopes that the Umayyads would someday reign with glory. So the Umayyads are still alive and well in Spain. Abd al-Rahman devoted much of his time unifying Muslim Spain and fighting back, as well as making peace with the small Spanish kingdoms in the north. For instance, while we know that Frula I successfully engaged the infidel at Potavium in Galicia, the history of the next three rulers are shadowy and seem to be at peace with the Muslims. So he has some peace going on. Far to the northeast, the governor of Girona and Zaragoza and Barcelona, they actually resented the Umayyad efforts to centralize the government around Cordoba. They relished the freedoms they learned to enjoy during the period of anarchy. Let's just see me for a little bit. And so we get into something more. And so rather than appeal to their fellow Muslims for help against Abd al-Rahman, and of course the Abbasids' natural, ally against the Umayyads, why not appeal there? Um, the governors of Girona, Zaragoza, and Barcelona, they called on, hey, Christians, can you help us? What? Here we go again. Can you help us? We'll have an alliance. And so Suleiman ibn Yagzan, he actually traveled all the way to Saxony to gain an alliance with Charlemagne. In his agreement, Suleiman promised to surrender Zaragoza to the Frankish king. However, when the Franks reached the great city in 778, his lieutenants had other ideas and kept the gates shut. Charlemagne then returned to his kingdom through the pass of Ronvelet, and the attack on their rear by the Basques gradually became transformed into the legend residing behind the Song of Roland. That's where it comes from. While these cities eventually succumbed to Abd al-Rahman, it is still vital to recognize that even by the 8th century, many Muslims were already saturated enough by their Christian surroundings in the north to negotiate political alliances with their religious so-called foes without a second thought, even against their Muslim brethren. The Franks were also becoming a formidable military power, and it was not long until the first of these great Muslim cities, Verona, surrendered to Christian forces under the command of Louis the Pious in 785. Now, we're getting to something really fun and interesting, um, and that is the account of the founding of the great mosque of Cordoba. Let's go right now and take a look. This showcases well how Christians were treated at the time of Abd al-Rahman, following the custom of dividing the principal churches between Christians and Muslims. You heard that, following the custom of dividing the principal churches between Christians and Muslims. So they are to be split, um, established by Umar when he first conquered Damascus. Half of the church of St. Vincent at Cordoba was allocated to the Muslims for a mosque. Let's go to the next image. As was routine during this early period of Muslim rule, al-Makari records that this church remained the main place for Christians to worship since, quote, all other churches in and out of the city were immediately pulled down, unquote. We'll go into that in a little bit. This is the whole thing. Look at this. The mosque side of the structure became overcrowded by the time of Abd al-Rahman I. The obvious remedy was to expand the mosque. Al-Makari tells how roof after roof was built in order to make it more roomy and spacious until the amount of roofs, one over the other, created a narrowness of the doors leading into it and the great number of wooden pillars supporting each addition, which then obstructed the passage, he says, and it became a matter of the greatest difficulty to penetrate into the interior of the mosque. Next image. Rather than force the Christians out of their side of the church, the Umayyad emirs sent for the chiefs of the Christians and proposed to purchase from them that part of the mosque which still retained in their hands, in order that he might add to it a Muslim place of worship. Despite the emir's generous offer, let's go to the next image, the Christians referred to the agreement from the earlier Muslim emirs when they first conquered Cordoba, promising their half of the building, and so refused his gift. The situation was resolved when the Christians agreed to relinquish their own part. Let's go to the next image. Agreed to relinquish their own part on the condition of being allowed to rebuild or repair one of the churches outside the walls, which had been destroyed, and hold it independently of the Muslims, and entirely consecrated to the worship of their God, unquote. Whether all these churches were destroyed, by the way, is questionable. You see, the reason why it's questionable, they say, oh, they destroyed all these churches. Why is it questionable? Is because we find other sources that are mentioning churches in that area that seem to be alive and well. Once again, we have to worry about the rhetoric behind it. They pulled them all down. Well, apparently they did not. So what happens is that there are references to many churches that still existed in the supposed region where they were pulled down. Well, anyway, the same sense of fairness, prevalent in internal affairs during the reign of Abd al-Rahman continued unto his successor, Hisham, who is ruling from 788 to 796. Let's take a look at his coin. You can see there, you can't see much because there's no image that is allowed on it, right? Okay, so Hisham, he's well known for his learned mannerisms and sense of culture. With peace at home, Hisham was freed to harass the Spanish Christian kingdoms. King Vermudo the First of Asturias, 788 to 791, enabled to handle the sudden onslaught of Muslim forces from the recently unified Emirate of Cordoba, gave his royal position to Alfonso II, 791 to 842, who quickly defeated the enemy at Lutos in 795. Alfonso revived the Christian hopes that the Muslims were able to suffer defeat, even to be pushed back. According to the Chronicle of Aldense, in Oviedo, Alfonso II established all things and the entire order of the Goths, both in the church and the palace, as it had been at Toledo. So there you have that. Um, um, so meanwhile, let's just look at the next two images real quick. I had this one. Uh, the strict Melkite school were graciously received by the hospitable Hisham I and their influences, with their rigorous interpretation of the Quran and the law, and natural hostility to innovation, rationalism, and speculation, came to dominate the judicial and theological thought of the kingdom. Now, I want to say this is that under the Umayyads, there was a lot of free thought. There's a lot of talking about science with a very much an open mind. The Melekite school is very restrictive in a theological sense. The effect, unfortunately, um, go to the next image, even though it's just the image of Cordoba. I can see it there. Okay, you can go ahead and put that down. The Melekite jurists, they began to censor and evaluate everything, even the morally depraved ways and drunkenness of the next emir, Al Hakim. The emir, of course, responded by attempting to limit their influence and returned. They formed a conspiracy to kill him around 805. The result was a crucifixion of 72 of their leaders. Nevertheless, the Melekite extreme zealousness to expose and document every moral abrasion, every possible moral abrasion, has left the modern historian some very interesting records of life at that time that have been filtered through later medieval judicial records. We got lots of stories. I mean, you want to know what regular life is like? You look at these Melekite jurors; they're looking at every aspect of life, and you can actually recreate the lifestyle in Cordoba just by going through these records about what you're not supposed to do. And then those in Cordoba are doing lots of what they're not supposed to do. So here we go. I'll give you a few illustrations. Um, by the way, I'll give you the document. El Wan Sharishi's Kitar Al-Mir contains many of these passages, how they dominate life in the ninth century. Here, we see that there is a lot of free exchange between Christians and Muslims constantly. In fact, uh, there is a ruling that they found that forbade Muslims from celebrating Christian festivals. In fact, these particular Muslims were condemned for imitating the Christians as well as exchanging gifts with them at Christmas time. In addition, Muslim men were also celebrating Midsummer's Day by racing horses and holding various tournaments, while on the same day, Muslim women were decorating their houses for the festival. I mean, they're just celebrating the Christian holidays with the Christians. The jurist believes this particular celebration is an act of the period of pre-Islamic ignorance, as it is a way they take out their clothes at night to be soaked by dew. Can you believe it? So, so you can see that they're soaking their clothes with dew as part of the washing process. Apparently, you're not supposed to do that if you're a jurist. So, it's, like I said, this is full of interesting little facts. Interfaith relationships are also evident in the episode where Talut ibn al-Jadar, who had studied under Malik and other great jurists, what happened for him is he fled for safety from the wrath of al-Hakim, a quote, for a whole year in the house of a Jew until things became quite quiet and passions were calmed down. So he got in trouble. He's hiding with his Jewish friend. Well, here Talut was safe. Yet he felt, after his lengthy stay, that he was obligated to continue his life undercover within the house of a friend that was a good Muslim. I better hide in a house under a good Muslim, who was the vizier Abu Basim, who immediately betrayed him the next day. You just can't make this up. Oh. So Abu Basim boasted to Al-Hakam that he caught Talut with his kindness. Al-Hakam was shamed by Talut's defense and also by the knowledge that a Jew protected him out of respect for his eminence in religion and scholarship, endangering his quote, his wife, his possessions, and his children. As a result, Talut was released, and the treacherous Abu Basim was ordered to leave the emir's presence forever and to remove his carpet, which refers to his seat on the council. I love these stories. I'm sorry, but you get a little color of life at that time. Um, so by the reign of Al-Hakam, many which is 796 to 822, and we're moving pretty fast now. Things are definitely changing quite a bit. Um, the first generation of converts were called Muslims, while their children were called Muwalladins. Even though the latter were not subject to the jizya, they were still treated poorly by more proper and legitimate Muslims, and were usually lumped with the Jews and Mozarabs, the latter Mozarabs latter being Christians who remained unconverted to Islam, but they did not adopt Arabic as their language. Sorry, who did? Sorry, adopt Arabic as their language of choice. Under Hisham II, they joined with these two groups in a great revolt against taxation. So now you're going to have a revolt now of those who are the um, Christians and those who are second generation Muslims. They're going to revolt during this period of time, and of course, unfortunately, this revolt did not go very well. The Mawaldan revolt at Cordoba itself happened in 818, where 300 other leaders were crucified and the rest of the community were expelled from their home district on the south side of Cordoba, which was then burned to the ground and continued on to find refuge in Morocco. By the way, um, a little bit something that nobody knows. However, one enterprising group of those that mixed Mos Arab and second generation Muslims. They traveled actually to Alexandria in Egypt, where they kind of dominated the city until they were kicked out in 827. And then they sailed on to Crete, where they actually founded a kingdom that lasted until the Byzantine reconquest in 961. There's a fun fact you'll never learn anywhere else. So, yay. Okay, so good news. Now, under the rule of Abd al-Rahman II, Cordoba became the center for both scholars and artists, not only in Western Europe, but in the entire Western Islamic world. This peace permitted the emirs to harass the Christian kingdoms and to reconquer the Balearic Islands. However, Al-Andalus was harassed in return, not by Christians. Well, who else is left? You're not going to believe this. The Vikings. You think you heard it all. And so what happens is the Vikings, who sailed the right up to Sevilla and sacked it. This prompted Abd al-Rahman II to create a mighty fleet to defend his coastline and to make some raids of his own. Under the rule of Abd al-Rahman II, I also mentioned that it was very tolerant. In fact, maybe considered too tolerant. But still, Christians fell under the lower social status of dhimmis. They still had to pay the jizya. There's still restrictions, but in many cases, the Pact of Umar was kind of let go, right? The anonymous history of Muhammad, written around 850, provides a glimpse of how Christians perceived the Muslim faith in Spain. The account, of course, is very mixed between hearsay from Christians and hearsay from Muslims, with a bit of hadith thrown in for good measure. Right up front, the author labels Muhammad as a heretic, and so Christians actually view Muhammad as being a part of not its own separate religion. This is where it's important, as part of the same religion of Christianity. It's just a heresy of it. That's something you'll never hear today. So those within Muslim Spain, Christians believed that Muhammad was, in a sense, another apostle, but an apostate that had but are to be treated the same as Arianism or Priscillianism and so forth. So again, I think that's an interesting point of view. Well, let's get to the next image. Well, what happens now is it turns out during this period of peace and accommodation, strange events began to occur amongst the Christian population. Suddenly, the Mos Arabs, these are the Christians who speak Arabic, of Cordoba approached various Muslim officials and denounced both Muhammad and the religion of Islam in general. These Christians knew very well that to blaspheme the prophet, let's go to the next image, meant sure death, which was an unpardonable crime to Muslims. The first of these martyrs was a prominent man by the name of Isaac, whose career amongst the Muslims had been quite successful, rising to the position of Secretary of the Covenant, which was the most esteemed office in government that was accessible to Christians. He was also, by the way, very fluent in Arabic. At a certain point, Isaac decided he had enough of public life and retired to the monastery at Tabanos. One day, Isaac decided to visit his former employer in Cordoba, and upon arriving at the emir's palace, proceeded to ask for instruction on Islam from the Quadi. As the judge began discussing Muhammad, Isaac suddenly denounced the prophet and asserted that he was burning in hell for deceiving the Arabs. Well, the Quadi was dumbfounded, and his first reaction was to slap Isaac, but he restrained himself when the counselors reminded him that Islamic law protected the accused from physical harm prior to sentencing. Some held that he must either be drunk or mad to disparage Islam in the presence of a qadi or a judge. However, Isaac assured him that the zeal of righteousness compelled him to speak out against Islam and that he was prepared to die for his indiscretion. Isaac was then sentenced, decapitated, suspended in an inverted position for public display as a warning to others who might contemplate such a blasphemy. And then, after his cremation, his ashes were sprinkled into the river so as not to leave anything behind for relics. Well, not only were the authorities unsuccessful to ward off others from pursuing such reckless courses through their dramatic execution of Isaac and his macabre display, 7 more Christians followed his example within a week. More followed the next month, and within the next 9 years, 50 approached the authorities and publicly denounced Muhammad and were executed as a result. Abd al Rahman reached out to Christian leaders at Cordoba and summoned them to a council to resolve the problem. The result was an ambiguous decree forbidding the faithful to court martyrdom, but it did not censor those who were already, of course, executed. But what motivated such bold professions of faith? I am very interested in this topic. Let's go to me for a few moments, because this is another important study in human psychology, right? What motivated these bold professions of faith by the Cordoban martyrs? In a This is a question worthy of scrutiny and has many possible answers. In the case of Isaac, for instance, his confession was perhaps tied to his ascetic practices, whereby public admission had a purifying effect, allowing those dark inner thoughts and repressed truths to be released from the shrouded chambers of the soul and then out into the world to the ears of others. This idea comes from John Cassian, who helped popularize this idea known as potentia spontanea, which, of course, so spontaneous penitent, being a penitent in that sense. So the concept circulated about Western Europe during this period. most likely including the monastery frequented by Isaac. As a result of this ritual, one became as spiritually pure as their first day of baptism. Now, according to Kenneth Wolf, the voluntary assumption of a penitential discipline, a decisive phase in many of the confessors' lives, was one particular popular way of demonstrating a renewed commitment to Christianity, of publicly defining oneself as a Christian. So, unquote. So, at the same time, this Pontificatia Spontanea became, because of the ramifications of such a confession before the Muslim authorities, revived another classic Christian ideal, of course, and that is a martyr, right? So they're doing this in order to purify their souls. They're going to die anyway. They want to go good, and so they're going to go ahead and say these things, what maybe they were secretly thinking, in order to have some big display. But why the search to have a martyrdom? Of course, many other authorities are say other things. We see Paul of Alvarez and Paulus Eugerius. Both men were active during the reigns of Abd al-Rahman and Muhammad the First. Let's take a look at this guy, Eulogius. Let's go see him. He's born of noble stock at Cordoba. He was dedicated to the church of Zoilus, where he received instruction from a certain abbot to go ahead and do this kind of activity. As a pupil, Eulogius attempted to debate doctrinal issues while still, under the tutelage of others. But he also believed very strongly in this idea of a bold sense of martyrdom. But what happens here is there seems to be a distaste for compromise. Oh, here we go. Oh, take that down. What do you mean by that? What's happening here is Christians are now dressed, those Arabs are dressed just like the Arabs. They're speaking Arabic. They are living in homes that are designed in a style that's consistent with North African as well as Middle Eastern styles. They love the artistry of Muslims. They are reading works by Muslims. They are, in many ways, becoming, from the perspective of many of these, too complacent with their surroundings. And the fear is that if it's not stopped, if there's not a shake up in their complacency, Christianity is doomed because Islam is creating too much of a comfortable life, too much of a peaceful life, and they're finding their identity being lost. Isn't that interesting? And so what's happened is now there is this resolve that they have to do something foolhardy. They have to throw themselves in front of making up, conjuring up that things are really terrible in order to fulfill this sense of martyrdom, in order to make a point to wake everybody else to return to the so-called Christian values. And so they will depict these persecutions much like the Roman persecutions, but all of this again is contrived. It's created. Okay, let's go to the next image. We have, of course, a king Ordono of Asturias. This Christian king also, he felt confident enough to begin to repopulate the Duero Valley, usually left as a forsaken no person's land between the Muslims and Christian realms. But now he feels like he can extend out. Next image, the area of Asturias, going towards the east. As a result, of course, during his reign, the city of Leon was revived and would soon become the new principal city of Christian Spain, situated definitely closer to the Duero River, and better poised as a jumping off point for the reconquest of Spain, an ideal now beginning to be expressed amongst the Christians. It is under King Ordono I of Asturias, 850 to 866, where you're starting to get the idea of a reconquista, a reconquest that is believed to be needed. And you can see now the positioning is happening. So the Emirate of Cordoba also experienced difficulty because the Mohammedan dominated cities of Saragossa, Huesca, and Tudela, ruled by the prosperous Bani Qasi family, felt powerful enough to ignore Cordoba. Musa, a self-proclaimed third king in Spain, according to the chronicle Alfonso III, at first fought Ordono I, but his successor, well, he preferred to work along with him. So we see another alliance. Next image, Alfonso III. And so now you're going to have a close connection with the Kingdom of Asturias and these northern Muslim kingdoms allying together against Cordoba. Again, you just can't make this up. But I think we're learning quite a bit in the process here. During this period of time, you have some remarkable architecture. I do want to say that, let's go to the next image. So you have, of course, Santa Maria at Naranco, at Oviedo, and you see the beginning, the precursor of what will become Romanesque architecture. So it's starting to happen here. You notice, I love Romanesque architecture. I can't help it. You notice now that unlike the earlier churches you had observed, now there's a sense of height that's getting taller. You're going to have, of course, more cross vaults that will be created. You'll have exterior supports. And of course, if you get taller, the walls have to get thicker. And that means sometimes it becomes somewhat dark. Let's take a close look at this particular church. I love this place. Beautiful, beautiful church. Again, I'm kind of an architecture a snob there, but there you have it. Okay. Well, guess what happens now? Let's go to the next image. Alfonso III is also best known for establishing a network of castles along the eastern frontier of Asturias. Well, and that land, of course, will be called Castile. Right? So this is happening now, named after those fortifications. So you see Castile is now existing. Alfonso, let's take a look. So you have a series of castles. Let's look at the next image. This is one that's later on, but you get the idea. These wonderful fortresses, and for which the name of the region, and of course, obviously, the Kingdom of Castile will come about. Alfonso went on to defeat Muhammad I at Polvaria in 878, forcing the emir to sue for peace. According to O'Callaghan, he's a great source. I recommend, if you're interested, to read his work. This was perhaps the first time that an emir at Cordoba submitted to the will of the king of Asturias, which gives them hope. As Alfonso II made various incursions deep into Al-Andalus, including attacks on Merida, Muhammad I was forced to negotiate with Asturians because of the threat that arose from, of course, the Bani Qasi, who are of those northern cities. Those northern Muslim cities, again, are causing such a pain. Next image. Alfonso II divided his kingdom amongst his three sons, but eventually Ordono II, 910 to 914, became the most prominent of these brothers and established his court at Leon. As a result, another big moment, Asturias became also known as the Kingdom of Leon. Here, Ordono II built both a palace and a cathedral, adopted Visigothic royal trappings, because, hey, they're Visigoths now, right? And had himself declared imperator, which expressed a claim to political supremacy over the whole of Spain, whether Christian or Muslim, and proclaimed the responsibility of the kings of Leon to recover their heritage, to reconquer the ancient territory of Hispania and to expel the Muslims from the peninsula. So now the smallest urgings of the Reconquista, the whispers, have now become a shout. Now it's becoming a big deal, right? But Ordano II's designs were premature for following the Cordoban emirate reigns of al-Mansur and Abd Allah. Muslim Spain came under the control of Abd al-Rahman III, who transformed the weak political entity of Cordoba into a powerful caliphate. Let's go to the next image. All right, there it is. He's holding the sword up there. The Spanish Christian kingdoms very quickly felt the wrath of Abd al-Rahman, shown here holding the sword, especially for the recent expansion into the Rihol region. Now, Ibn Abd Rabini describes how God's partisans under Abd al-Rahman were victorious over the two infidels, that's the king of Leon and Navarre, respectively, and the familiars of Satan were, quote, put to flight. This is according to Arjuza. Abd al-Rahman was finally able to defeat Umar ibn Hafsun at Bobestro in 928. Let's take a look at this particular individual. Next image. This gets, again, pretty interesting. What happened here is tracing his roots back to Gothic nobility. The Muawwadin, who's means he's now a convert to Islam, but in succession. Umar ibn Hafsun had been a constant source of division since the days of Muhammad I, especially gaining allegiance from his fellow Muawwadins, who had grown weary of their unequal status. However, Umar ibn Hafsun risked his status and compromised his chances for survival by actually converting to Christianity. He hoped this tactic would bring the Christian nations to his side, but this is too far. Instead, it made the Muslims even more determined to stamp him out as someone who betrayed the faith and therefore was considered worse than infidel. Ibn Hayyan, next image, describes the mountainous fortress of Bobastra as a foundation of polytheism, a house of unbelief and falsehood, a center of Christian power. Its shelter, refuge, abode, and bastion made redoubtable from its flanks and perimeter. That's obviously a primary source, unquote. Yet, I'll take the image down. Yet, despite their convictions, following the surrender of Bobastra, the Muslims agreed to stay true to their word and permit Umar ibn Hafsun to leave unharassed. Ibn Hayya records, with mind aflutter, his heart palpitating, Umar ibn Hafsun was not delighted to be leaving devoid of strength, nor was he pleased to be fleeing under the pact of safe conduct. Umar ibn Hafsun died of natural causes in 917. It was only when his four sons continued their father's struggle that Abd al-Rahman was forced to resort to more barbaric displays of exhuming Ibn Hafsun's body, which was then crucified at the gates of Cordoba as a warning to future rebels. But hey, he kept his promise, right? Okay, so, well, what about the court? Now, Abd al-Rahman III, he tried to be sympathetic to the plight of the Mohammedan as well as the Mos Arabs, realizing all too well the difficulties inherent in the lack of solid identity. He himself, by the way, was of mixed blood. He had light hair and blue eyes, stemming from his Frankish mother. In fact, when Arab dignitaries visited him from the east, Abd al-Rahman III actually darkened his hair in order to gain more credibility from those expecting a more traditional Middle Eastern monarch. But in truth, Abd al-Rahman represented the very best of both worlds, speaking both Arabic and Latin fluently, and understanding the concerns and distrust between the Christians and Muslims, as well as those who lived a lifestyle culturally somewhere in between. Therefore, he pardoned all rebels and provided all his subjects equality and fair opportunities to advance to virtually any public office. Because of his reforms, Large portions of the population were assimilated into the diverse pool that was becoming the culture of Al-Andalus. He was instrumental in this way. Abd al-Rahman also made his kingdom a caliphate by assuming the title of caliph on January 16th, 929. No longer was the Abbasid caliph's name proclaimed in the mosques. And now, of course, Abd al-Rahman takes it up. Even after Abd al-Rahman's attacked the Spanish kingdoms, you're going to have, of course, a research, but let's take a look a little bit at some images that connect to the court of Abd al-Rahman. So look at the next three images. You get the idea of just the beautiful culture that's coming together, art and architecture and literature. This is a big moment. Also, the beginning of a time of a revival of literature that will continue into the 10, 1100s. Also, eventually, we'll have, of course, Jewish mysticism arising from this area. Let's go to the next image. It was also viewed as somewhat decadent to a certain degree. Next image. Maybe really decadent. So next image. So we get to Romero II of Asturias Leon, 930 to 951. He proved to be a worthy opponent to the caliph. He defeated him at Osma in 933 and again at Simancas in 939. In fact, Romero even humbled the unusually independent city of Zaragoza, forcing them to pay tribute. Ironically, what hampered Romero the most from continuing his expansion southward were the challenges from the Count of Castile, Ferdinand Gonzalez. It was during the early 10th century that Castile, centered around the rough and rugged town of Burgos, began to assume its own independent identity, and with laws dictated by custom rather than by transmission of written word. However, after Romero's death in 951, Asturias Leon began to decline as a result of inner turmoil. In fact, around the 960s, you can see me again a little bit. The 960s, we have a Jewish traveler by the name of Ibrahim um, Yahub al-Israeli al-Tortishi. No, I will not say that name again. So he journeyed about these northern regions of Spain, and he didn't leave a very flattering picture of Christians in the area of Castile, Asturias, Leon. He described them as a, quote, a treacherous people of depraved morals who do not keep themselves clean and only wash once or twice a year in cold water. You see, why is there a contrast here? Did you guys know that down in Cordoba, uh, typically people bathe every day? So there was a difference when it comes to basic hygiene. Furthermore, he states that, quote, they do not wash their clothes once they have put them on until they fall to pieces, and assert that the filth that covers them, thanks to the sweat, is good for their bodies and that it actually keeps them, quote, healthy. So they're wearing stinky clothes stuck to their bodies, and the sweat is actually good for the health. I don't want, if I went back in time, actually, if there's a book of northern Spain, it was a scratch and sniff, I don't want it. I'll just say that right now. Um, he goes on to describe the sandy soil of the terrain and the local foods, including their apple cider. Hey, that's a plus. And a drink called boshuka, which is made with flour, which is kind of a beer. I think that's interesting. The tranquility of Al-Andalus continued under Al-Hakam, um, who behaved in every way as a very cultured caliph, including, of course, learning and mutual tolerance. However, with his death, various notables at court attempted to thwart the accession of Al-Hakam's 10-year-old son. A plan was quickly stopped through the efforts of the boy's mother, Sub, and Subh, S-U-B-H, who gained the support of a vizier by the name of al-Mushafti, who will become, of course, al-Mansur. And thus, of course, as a result, the real power of the throne will now be al-Mansur, a man known for his ruthless administration, precision, keen intellect. He had ambitions that were beyond just the average average man, and so, in fact, he used his power to manipulate the court. And I'll just show you a picture of what happens under his reign for those in the north who are thinking that they're going to be able to regain their territories. And a picture is just worth 1,000 words. So let's just go to the image real quick. So what happened is while Al Mansur pressed for greater tolerance, encouraging Muhammadans to pursue government posts and most Arabs, by the way, to join the army, in fact, his army included many Berber mercenaries, very loyal. He also almost sort of made his business to involve himself in everyone else's affairs. And he started to, of course, attack the north. Al Mansur actually offended Christian sensibilities by sacking Santiago de Compostela, which was an emerging pilgrimage site dedicated to the Apostle James. He actually burned the church containing the relics of James to the ground, and he took the bells for the great mosque at Cordoba. And of course, in revenge for this action later on, of course, what will happen under Ferdinando the Third, following the conquest of Cordoba in 1236, he forced Muslim captives to carry these very same bells all the way back to the shrine on their backs. But anyway, so you have this idea here. Well, so following the reign of Al Mansur, the Caliphate of Cordoba began to slowly decline. Next image. It began to decline and goes into chaos. And so what will happen is as it declines, there's political fragmentation of Cordoba, and this introduced what's called the Taifa period in Spanish history. With the shattering of glorious Cordoba, rather than ending the age of artistic and literary accomplishments, each kingdom was inspired to become a little Cordoba, gathering in their own scholars and architects and casting an anxious eye towards their neighbors to make sure that they were not outdone by them in their creative accomplishments. So the good news is that you get basically 23 taifas in the end, and they're all little centers of culture, all little Cordobas. So that's the good news. And some of the most significant cities are Cordoba, Sevilla, Granada, Toledo, Badajoz, and Zaragoza. Now, we do want to talk about this. You have Zawi ibn Ziri, was one of the Sanhaj Berbers, who was brought over to assist Abba al-Malik. Anyway, when Muhammad II assumed the Caliphate of Cordoba in 1009, he made the political mistake of allowing his hatred of Berbers to cloud his judgment, and he went about attacking their places of residence in the city. In addition, he molested their leader, Zawa ibn Ziri, which caused instant revolt. Nevertheless, Zawi ibn Ziri decided with the princes of Sanhaya to return to Morocco. However, their journey was cut short by a request from the city of Elvira for protection as well as defense from ensuing anarchy. Zawa ibn Ziri of the Zirids agreed to help, but while he was graciously received, word traveled quickly to those bent upon driving the allies of the former Hajibs off the peninsula. And so what happens is that the Berbers were consolidating their power at the southern Spanish town, and so he thought, well, we're all at Elvira, but Elvira, it's indefensible. We can't defend it. It's sprawled out on the open plain. You're wondering, why is Dr. Riefel taking so much time on this Elvira city? Is it important? The Elvirans were quick to perceive that from its central position, the mountain on which the city of what now Granada now stands commands all the surrounding country. And so they began to build there, and all of them to a man, both Andalusian and Berber, took upon themselves the task of setting up home there. And so, yes, next image, please. Even though Zawa ibn Zuri soon left for Karun, he established the prosperous Zer dynasty of Granada that would last until the arrival of the Almoravids, but it would also stem as the rise of Granada in general. And we'd have to remember that the last bastion of Muslim presence in Spain happens to be here, this impregnable fortress. So this is important to know. His successors include Habas ibn Maqsim and Badis Habas and so forth. So yeah, okay, let's go to the next image. Again, we're kind of going faster now. This is really beautiful, right? You have a chance to go to Granada, go. Next image. Well, now as the Taifa kingdoms flourished in disunity, the Christian kingdom of Leon prospered under a newly founded unity under Alfonso VI, 1065 to 1109. Taking advantage of the weak Taifas, the Christian king forced many of these kingdoms to pay him tribute, but his relation with Toledo, and especially the cultured ruler Al-Mamun, was a healthy one and demonstrates that Muslim and Christian leaders could get along and benefit in the process. Yet his grandson Al-Qadir was unable to deflect various attacks from the surrounding Taifa states to the point where his citizens lost respect for him. While Al-Qadir was unable to defend his position and his natural ineffectual demeanor further hampered by his constant fears of various plots to supplant him, the less radical citizens of Toledo requested Alfonso to intervene. That he did, and on May 6, 1085, Toledo succumbed to Christian forces. Holy Toledo, big moment. Realizing that the rest of Muslim Spain could be unrolled from under them by the might of this Christian king, the Taifas desperately appealed for help from the Almoravids across the straits. The wisdom of this action is questionable, since the differences between the various Muslim groups and the Christians were in many ways less extreme than the differences with the zealous Almoravids across the way. Even Allah laments, everything went well indeed, and I attained the limits of my aspirations until the Almoravid business came up. Everything becomes a mess. So let's go to the next image. Who are the Almoravids? Well, they were from the wilds of the Sahara wastes, regimented to a life of strict self-denial and tedious devotion. They had extreme conservative interpretations of the Quran. They were accustomed to live without any luxuries, especially wine, which was strictly forbidden. And this desire for a lack of personal amenities became a defining factor for how they were perceived. Uh, Furthermore, their women were restricted to live behind the veil. Worse yet, to the Taifa kingdoms, the Almoravids did not believe in taxation of any kind for any fellow Muslims. Newly converted to the faith of Islam, the Almoravids reflected the kind of unquestionable zeal to wage war for Allah that characterized the faith earlier on. Tolerance was not in their vocabulary, only submission. In contrast, the Taifa kings had grown fat from a life of plenty, and their religious devotion had degenerated to, well, Friday tributes. Success in politics and the accumulation of wealth and lands were what mattered most to these Spanish Muslims, and that meant making an alliance with the Christian king and betraying their fellow Muslims in the process. So be it. Both the Spanish Muslims and the Almoravids were in for some big disappointments. So let's go to the next image. Well, here they come. The Almoravids responded quickly to the pleas of their Muslim brethren, and by June of 1086, they were already at Algeciras and headed for Seville. Under the leadership of Yosa ibn Tashfin, the Almoravids engaged the Christians in battle near Manajo. Let's take a look at the next image. This is October 23rd of 1086, Joseph was heard to remark, "What is it to me that these people are massacred? They are all enemies." Huh. Unquote. Defeating the Christians, Ibn Abazar grimly records in his Rod al-Kirtis, that's the name of the source, that how piles, quote, piles of heads severed from the bodies of defeated Christians were loaded on carts and sent to the cities of Al-Andalus to give visual testimony to the completeness of the victory, unquote. The behavior of these new visitors from North Africa was shocking, not just to Spanish Christians, but to the Muslims there too. Clearly, these Almoravids were not accustomed to how things were done in Spain. The Almoravids also become disillusioned with the Spanish Muslims. They don't like them either. Rather than pursue the Christians, the rough tribesmen decided to return to Africa. The reasons were many, but the main one Abd Allah records was that once Yosef, quote, had heard and seen for himself such disagreement amongst us, he could visualize no prospect of our survival in the peninsula, unquote. That's according to the Tibian. Joseph returned to Spain again in 1089 and attempted to force the Christians to surrender Aledo. However, he was joined by very few of the Taifa kings and so returned to North Africa once more. When Abd Allah and some of the other Taifa kings who did join Joseph in his campaign against the infidel asked if he could leave some of his troops behind so they could maybe, protect themselves from possible Christian revenge for their actions, the emir replied coldly, "Mend your ways and you'll be able to cope with your enemy," unquote. By this time, Joseph began to conclude that the Taifa kingdoms were the main problem, and when he returned the following year, he set about conquering the Muslim Taifas one by one. Abd Allah was quickly deposed from Granada and exiled to Morocco, where he wrote his famous Tibian. So there you have it. Let's take this down. So we're not going to go through the entire Tibian. I would love to. I do have all that here. I would just mention that when it comes to the Arjusa, it talks about the fact that the Christians seem to be obsessed with their crosses and their bells, which of course are looked at as idolatrous. Let's move on to now the Jews during this period of time. Next image. The Jews also rose to prominence. Let's go to the next image. That would maybe be better. During the Taifa period of Andalus. We have to realize, of course, that they were seen as a second-class citizens under the Visigoths, but under the Muslims, they rose up in very significance. And so what happens is that, unlike the Visigothic rule, Jews could worship the way they pleased under the Muslims and follow their customs without fear of repercussions. The Jews had another factor in their favor. They were not Christians, nor were they Muslims. Next image. Christians were suspect because their co-religionists were living in northern Spain and attempting to conquer Al-Andalus for themselves. Fellow Muslims were not trusted because their diverse tribal and kinship relations made each individual a possible player in the endless contest for power. So what was neutral? Gradually, Jews then were employed to fill many of the lower staff positions in the treasury. The self-styled caliph and his son Al-Hakim, 961 to 976, even had a Jew by the name of Hashdai ibn Shaprut as a foreign minister and Nasai of the Jewish communities. By the 11th century, many Jews rose to the rank of vizier, spoke and wrote in Hebrew and Arabic, and were part of a cultural renaissance that was almost unprecedented in Jewish history. Spain became a second promised land. And at this time, you have, of course, the growth and popularity of a mystical form of Judaism. And of course, that's the Kabbalah. And so this is all happening during this time. Abraham ibn Dawud, in his book of tradition, records the careers of a certain Jacob ibn Jau, a tax collector, living during the reign of Caliph Hisham, 976 to 1013, when he and his brother Joseph found themselves at odds with a local rabbi, Hanak, recognized by Muslims as the ruler of the Demi. They were beaten and cast into prison by one King al-Mansur's eunuch, just like a Christian dhimmi, lead individuals of these communities in charge of overseeing their spiritual well-being and maintaining their traditions and customs were suddenly thrust into unsuitable positions of leadership that commanded secular as well as sacred power. Jacob Joseph fell on the wrong end of this particular dhimmi leader, but he is still, indeed, a Jew who is persecuting other Jews in his role. Okay. Um, so you have this. Now, I know we have to kind of keep on going, but I want to mention the fact that this is a period of time of so much in the way of culture, Jewish culture thriving. Let's keep on going, though. Obviously, you're going to have a figure by the name of El Cid that rises up. You may have heard of him before. The period of the Typhus saw the emergence of new Christian kingdoms, as well as the renewed strength of the older ones, especially at Leon in the north, preying upon the weakness and division between the Muslim emirs, the Christian kings, and even prominent nobles such as Rodrigo Diaz, better known as El Cid of Spanish legend, made territorial gains and profits through tributes by playing one Muslim city over to the other. Let's go to the next image. All right, here. The culmination of this process of exploitation and reconquest was the Christian capture of Toledo by Alfonso the Sixth in 1085. So, of course, we have the Almoravids to thank for that. Let's keep on going. Also, during this period of time, you have the Song of Roland becoming a popular myth. I would just say that, as I mentioned before, that Charlemagne came to the aid, and it turned out that well, let's go into that. Let's go into the Song of Roland just a little bit here. Okay, so in the history of Rodrigo, a new spirit from the north swept into Spain in the latter part of the 11th century, which embraced the ethics of Christian chivalry and honor and invigorated Christians with a zeal for a crusade against the so-called heathen. This was the age of the Great First Crusade of 1095. It's of feudalism, it's of knights, it's of castles. Two works best illustrate this period. The Historia Rodrigia, 1102 to 1238, written from the perspective of an author with a historical perspective living in Spain. But the one I want to focus in on is the great French epic, The Song of Roland. While a beautiful literary piece, The Song of Roland is also based on a historical event that occurred in the year 778. What's next image? When Basques slaughtered the rear guard of Charlemagne's army in the Pyrenees as they pulled out of Spain after a few months of intense campaigns at Pamplona and against Saragossa. What makes this epic so intriguing is the fact that it was written between 1098 and 1100, and so it reflects values of that age rather than the time of Charlemagne, with knights seated on a white silk brocade, amusing themselves by playing backgammon, while the wise and older men played chess, and the agile young warriors practiced fencing beneath a pine tree besides a wild briar bush. I mean, this is, Roland constantly reminds his readers that it is the vassal's obligation to defend and fight for his lord, exclaiming, "It is our duty to be here for our king. For his lord, a vassal must suffer hardships and endure great heat and great cold, and must lose both hair and hide," unquote. In the case of the Song of Roland, the cause of his lord, Charles the Great, which is Charlemagne, is a crusade against the Muslims of Spain, more in fashion, of course, in the 11th than the 8th century. Conveniently, the belligerent Basques in the original account become Muslims attacking as a result of internal treachery of Count Catalan. The reason for this grand crusade against the Muslims is simple. Quote, the pagans are wrong and the Christians are right. So we have this very strict dualistic concept, unquote. Unlike the attitude of accommodation that characterized many of the relationships between Christians and Muslims living in Spain in the Taifa period, um, for the character of Charlemagne in the epic, there can be no Christian servility to Muslim overlords. When the emir offers Charles an opportunity to become his vassal, he responds, quote, this seems of great villainy to me. I must render to a pagan neither peace nor love, unquote, but, quote, receive the faith which God presents to us, Christianity, and that I shall always love you, then serve and believe in the Almighty King, unquote. Thus, here, the shades of gray so prevalent in Taifa, Spain, have become once again black and white. Before the great battle against the enemy at the main pass, Archbishop Turpin opens the ensuing conflict by declaring that for our king, we must be prepared to die in order to sustain the Christian faith. Archbishop Turpin follows this by instructing, confess your sins, pray for the grace of God to save your souls, and I shall absolve you of all. If you die, you will be blessed martyrs and take your place in paradise on high. And so now you see another idea coming about. And that's the idea if you fight and die in the crusades, guess what? You immediately go to paradise. You immediately go to heaven. And so, even if you're a bad wretch of a person, even a criminal, if you're fighting on the Crusades, this is what's happening. In true Crusader style, as penance, he orders them to strike, and when they are fully absolved and freed of their sins, the Franks rise and get to their feet and begin the battle. Later, as the scene becomes more wretched and bloody, with body piled upon body, I'm quoting from it, the Archbishop continues his holy exhortations, crying out, it is far better to die fighting, but in one thing I can act as guarantee, holy paradise is open to you, for you will take your seat amongst the innocents. And so the Franks rejoice. So we're seeing this now hardened crusader ideal that, of course, will be transferred over to the Crusades per se. In fact, this is Spain really is the how do I say this? The practice place for the Crusades. The Reconquista against the Muslims in Spain, and now with these kinds of black and white ideas, will then be replicated and moved out towards the Muslims uh, in the area of Palestine, in the area of the Middle East. Isn't this? I think this is fascinating seeing these changes. But I love charting it. Not that I love what's happening, but I think it's so interesting charting these ideas out. Okay. Well, Charlemagne is no Urban II. Even he is made into a holy king, almost appearing like God in the Old Testament descriptions. So there you have it. Um, all right. Let's go to the next image. He's portrayed as visually rising early in the morning for mass and muttons, having prophetic dreams and visions from angels, displaying an intimate knowledge of the Old Testament stories, and able to bless and absolve those doing his work with his right hand in Jesus' name and mind. Roland becomes a Christ-like figure, beloved by Charlemagne like a son, for whom he undertakes his exploits against the heathen. And yet, while the king knew Roland was to be betrayed by his own stepfather, Ganelin, he allows it to happen with more shedding of tears. The Muslims of Saragossa represents evil, are informed by a Judas figure, Ganelin, and so you have these ideas all kind of put together. Okay. Let's go to the next image. Meanwhile, it's kind of blurry. In the 11th century, three main sites of pilgrimage in the Christian world stood out above the rest: Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela in Spain. As the Pope Calixtus 1119 to 1124 explains, that the Apostle James was carried across the sea with an angel of the Lord accompanying it in a boat from Jerusalem to Galicia, unquote. So as a result of this translatio, Galicia and Spain were regenerated by the grace of baptism, he says, through James, so as to strengthen with his patronage, bestowed with his benefits, look down from his miracles, and prepare seats for his heavenly kingdom. So what do you say in English? What I'm saying is a legend came about that the apostle James somehow on a boat translated over to Santiago de Compostela, and that he is buried there. By the way, when he arrives at the shore, he hits a rock. And so from that foundation, then, is the foundation of the church. What's going to happen here? This is a metaphor for the very same kind of foundational rock that gave Peter his apostolic authority. After all, James is one of the three apostles closest to Jesus and was made head of the first church in Jerusalem before Paul was at Rome. Such apostolic claims carried with it a type of authority that could upset the absolute authority of Rome, and so it was probably in the Pope's best interest to co opt that power believed to threaten him. Rome may have had Peter and Paul, but Spain now had James, and the Galatians made the most of it. There was even a discovery of the body of James by Bishop Theodemore in 813, and it was first protected by a fine chapel built by Alfonso II, 792 to 842, and then the three-aisle basilica built Alfonso III to 899. Let's go to the next image. Part of this latter church was destroyed by Almansor in 997, who carried away the holy bells to Muslim Cordoba. Yet the resilience of the cult of James continued to thrive with a new Romanesque church begun over the Apostles' Tomb in 1078. Let's go to the next image. And so this becomes a major pilgrimage site. Let's go to the next image. So many pilgrims ventured forth to Santiago de Compostela with what they considered to be the correct motivations and with the right attitude. And so Pope Calixtus believed that whoever goes to the venerable altar of the Blessed James of Galicia for the sake of pure and worthy prayer and of truly penitent soul will obtain absolution from the apostle and pardon from the Lord. This preoccupation with the ascetic practices was vital for the purification process of the petitioning suppliant and the keys to tapping into the apostle's miraculous power. The pilgrim's route, in this sense, was the best way, but narrow, and including the mortification of the body and the taming of lust, which purifies the spirit. And so, what happens is this route to this day is a famous pilgrimage way. Okay, so let's continue to the next image. All right. Well, so we have now the Crusades are going on. And what about there's a figure by the name of Peter the Venerable? Peter the Venerable became the abbot over the Cluny monasteries at the age of 28, the year 1122. Let's take a look at the next image. He was well known for his peaceful nature, able to soothe rival factions, and of course, arbitrate in feudal disputes. When the powerful Bernard of Clairvaux, after Peter Abelard, only Peter the Venerable was able to calm him down. Let's go to the next image. This is the image of the Cluny Monastery. It was the largest church in Western Christendom. And here's another image of it. It was destroyed, next image, destroyed during the French Revolution. But so that's all that's left. And of course, the next picture is it's my drawing of it. So okay. So there you have that. Okay, so take that down. Anyway, I am really so what happens now is long and the short of it is Peter the Venerable who's over Cluny, who had a keen intellect, decided that he wanted to understand Islam. And so he conceived and planned and sponsored a study on the Quran. And so his contribution, of course, is the translation of the Quran from Arabic into Latin. I know. Of course, his reasons are obviously apologetic. He believed that in order to understand a religion, you have to understand their sacred texts and see their point of view. Only then can you preach to Muslims about Christianity because you are now well informed about their own ideas and perspectives. Even though, of course, there's a proselytizing idea behind it, it's still a kind of a big deal for that. Uh, moving right along, I'm kind of skipping over sections because I'm seeing that time is going short here. Okay, next image here. Okay, and okay, so Holy Toledo. So what's going to happen now is that, and I'll say this very briefly, is that the Christians now have Toledo. Well, Toledo was a major archival site for the Muslims. And so by the conquest of Toledo, we're going to get so much in the way of manuscripts, of sciences that come originally from the Greek and Latin authors of the classical world. And then they'll end up in Toledo. And now they will be translated at Toledo into Latin and then spread and power ideas like scholasticism. Okay, so you have that. So this is like a nice little image here. Let's go to the next image. Yeah, so let's just go through these a little bit quickly. So you have the school set up. It's kind of an informal school of translation. Go to the next one. Go to the next one. So you see all the work that's being done here. So just next image. So the manuscripts are coming on over. Okay, let's go to the next image. Of course, then you have another group called in. So you thought we are done with groups coming over, but the reality is that you also have the Almohads, and now they're called over because of again a plea to come on over. But and of course they don't last very long either. Let's go to the next one, next image. Okay, all right. Next image. Okay, so now we have more of a definition between the realms of Aragon and Castile. And so, as you can see, these Christian kingdoms are not only solidified, they are moving very quickly towards the south. So, what happens now is in 1248, Fernando III, finally of Leon, captures the great city of Sevilla with all its wealth and trade connections. And so, this is a big moment. And of course, this is a big blow also for Muslim Spain. Um, in fact, there were cries. Abu al-Bakrandi bewails the fate of Sevilla, warning his readers that everything declines after reaching perfection. Therefore, let no man be beguiled by the sweetness of pleasant life. He cries out um, as follows: says, "Where is Sevilla, and the pleasure it contains, as well as a sweet river overflowing and brimming full?" So you have the fall. Now, I'm going to skip over to a big moment. On January 2nd, and this is important. Okay, so I'm going to go through this. I want to focus, but I have to get here, or you guys will not be happy. Okay. On January 2nd, 1492, King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile rode into Granada, meeting Bodil, the Moorish king, with the keys to the city. The former king of Granada uh, tried to dismount his horse in order to kiss Ferdinand's hand, but the king refused the gesture. Meanwhile, on top of the Tower of Commerce at Alhambra, they raised the cross and royal banners As the queen's clergymen sang Te Deum Laudamus, despite a small uprising within the city that was brutally extinguished by the authorities, the capitulation of Granada was peaceful as an event. The extent terms of surrender illuminate a different kind of conquest from Sevilla, at least initially, with rights given to the Muslim population in terms that enable them to retain their property, as opposed to being forced to evacuate, as we saw in Sevilla. As expected, lawsuits which arise between the Moors will be judged by their law, the Sharia law. But unexpectedly, suits between a Christian and a Moor will be judged by a Christian judge and a Moorish quade, or Moorish judge, in order that neither side may have grounds for a complaint against the sentence. Now, that seems pretty fair. Dual representation and custody is also revealed in the case of the Muslim prostitute by the name of Miriam, who became accountable to two counselors of the Muslim community of Valencia, as well as representatives of Don Rodrigo de Mendoza, Lord of Elscour, who claimed her as his free vassal. The Muslims of Granada were also allowed to retain their arms and horses and were not obliged to give more tribute to their highness than they used to give to the Moorish king. So everything looks good, right? What could possibly go wrong? It's 1092. It's 1492. With the facade of fairness and toleration, the Christian monarchs played the diplomatic game. But this would all soon change. Christians and Muslims could be seen even celebrating together at Corpus Christi Day at Valencia. A group of Muslim tourists ate that day at the house of a Christian tailor and went on to watch the parade with a Christian weaver. It looks like we're off to a happy ending. Then, out of nowhere, a Muslim stabbed a fellow Muslim within this mix of Muslims and Christians. All at once, the crowd segregated, as if by instinct, and the Christians moved to take arms against the Muslims. It was just a powder keg ready to happen. The situation was fragile and did not last. A mere 10 years later, on February 12th, 1502, all Muslims were ordered to evacuate Spain by royal command. An era was over. For the Jews, their day of expulsion came 10 years earlier in 1492. Let's take a look at that in detail because you want me to. Before the expulsion of 1492, the Jews of Spain were privileged above all their brethren in lineage, wealth, virtue, and wisdom, according to the 15th century Rabbi Moses Arago, well known for his translation of the Torah into Spanish. Jews had reached the upper ranks of government in both Muslim and Christian Spain, acting as viziers to emirs and advisors and ministers to kings. For instance, Joseph Pinchon under Enrique of Castile. Although this was often proved as a liability, Jews were renowned as doctors and merchants, philosophers, and scientists, contributing greatly to the intellectual fervor that swept from Toledo to Andalusia. But the golden dream began to sour upon the very vine that gave it life in the first place. But before we consider the direct causes leading to the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, we must realize that despite all the advances of individual Jews, the community as a whole, while tolerated, was never fully accepted and integrated into the life of Christian Spain. For example, this fact is made clear by the Cita Perdidas of Alfonso X of Castile. Similar to the Islamic law concerning Christian churches, now no new synagogues could be built, nor were they to receive minor repairs. And so you have these limitations. There was regulation also against indulgences and restriction, that they are more product to local lore and fantasy than reality, declaring against Jews who make a practice of, quote, stealing children and fastening them to crosses and making images of wax and crucifying them when they cannot obtain children. That's a quote, by the way, and so on. However, in many ways, this piece of legislation is more sympathetic to the Jews than the Muslims, making special provisions to ensure that the Sabbath is not disturbed in any way, even to the point where judges are forbidden to bring them into court on account of debt or to arrest them or cause them any other annoyance on that particular day. Well, at least they had that, but that's very little. The threads for the cause of the Jewish expulsion are many and form a multi-variegated tapestry of intrigue and miscommunication, as well as misguided efforts to spiritual reform potential wayward Christians. One of these reforming groups was an order known as the Dominicans. This is an outgrowth of the Cistercians. The Dominicans, founded by Dominic Guzman in 1215, believed one of their primary duties was the conversion of heretics and eventually Jews and Muslims to the faith. Dominicans, like Ramon de Profond, dreamed of a day when Jews and Saracens were to be, quote, taught Latin and to expound the scriptures, unquote. Ramon also outlined the ideal whereby 10 Jews and Saracens, together with 10 friars of religion, learned holy law, after which they preached our law to other Jews and to the Saracens our holy Christian faith, unquote. It seems Peter the Venerable was a century too early. However, no Dominican subscribed to the peaceful pursuits of Ramon, becoming the main agents of what is called the Inquisition. They had one goal: the eradication of even the slightest Judaizing tendencies within the hearts and minds of Christians and suspected conversos. And while addressing this, what they call an illness, why not seek to cauterize the very source of what they called a disease itself? It's pretty upsetting. And so the Jewish communities became a potential target for Dominicans. Thus, in 1391, the Dominican Ferrant Martinez, through his passionate preaching, convinced an unruly mob to eliminate their common foe and destroy the Jewish quarter of Seville. After 4,000 Jews were slaughtered and even more supposedly converted, and 23 synagogues destroyed, the anti-Semitic rage spread to this Dominican's own town of Iquia, where he was archdeacon, and nearby Cremona, where all the Jews were killed. Subsequently, the terror spread to Toledo, where all those unwilling to embrace the precepts of Christianity were slain. A certain rabbi by the name of Judah, from the proud line of Rabbi Asher ibn Yo, slit the throats of his wife and children and then his own rather than convert. Eventually, after reaching Cordova, where of course, Judaea was razed to the ground, Barcelona, all of Aragon, Catalonia, and even the Balearic Islands, over 70 Jewish communities were destroyed. And roughly between, with about basically 50,000 Jews were slaughtered, and over 100,000 were supposedly converted to Christianity. When the Jews encountered another radical Dominican, Vincent Ferrer, leading up to another potential hazardous campaign to convert the Jews in 1411-12, and moved from one Castilian city to the other with a torch in one arm and a crucifix in the other, along with a hostile mob and a group of religious ascetics, scourging themselves with whips in imitation of the Passion of Jesus. They thought it best to allow him to preach in their synagogue, and in many cases felt the wisest course was conversion rather than possible death. The dread of massacre of 1391 still fresh in their minds. It's like, okay, here they come. They're whipping, they're arriving. Let's just let them in, let them preach. Since this first generation of conversos were brought to the baptismal font with a knife at their throats, The genuine nature of their true conversion was always in question, and for the most part, the new Christians in pre expulsion Spain were Christians in name, but not so much in spirit, many wanting to return to the religion of their Jewish forefathers and patiently waiting for the opportunity to practice their beliefs again, or doing so in secret. Not that every converso retained their Jewish faith, for some were active within Christian circles. Some, like Paul of Burgos, overcompensated for their lack of Christian roots and became a persecutor of their former Jewish brethren. In his case, he helped pass a law in Castile in 1412 that forced Jews to wear distinctive badges. This is where it starts. And of course, this goes into Nazi Germany later on, right? This is where it starts, right here. To live in their own ghettos and forbade social interaction with Christians in every area. Another, Joseph al-Locri, was active in the Disputation of Tortosa, ordered by Pope Benedict, attempted to prove the Talmud predicted the coming of Christ. Of course, the result of this one-sided affair, including mandatory visits to a local church for every Jew at least 3 times a year, and the complete restriction of studies related to the Torah. That's what happened as a result. Despite these examples, many conversos fell somewhere in between embracing their former beliefs and completely attacking them, and so their lifestyle often reflected a gentle mix of the two traditions, or maybe not so gentle. And I do mean traditions, since they would go faithfully to Mass and even confession, but they would also hold to certain Jewish dietary restrictions. This brand of nominal Christianity with a mixture of Judaism was precisely the kind of so called heresy the Inquisition was established to look into, and if possible, to force a confession and then to purge them as a result. The Autos de Fe contains many descriptions of the Inquisition, how intensified, and according to the charter of the expulsion of the Jews after 1480, in order to cleanse these suspect Christians from their Judaizing activities, they did various things. To be reconciled, you were to march in procession to the local cathedral, both men and women, without cloaks, bareheaded, barefoot, and holding an unlit candle in their hands. The public disgrace was agonizing, and many went shrinking with pain and weeping and tearing out their hair. Then, after hearing their heretical crimes, we're not done yet. This is how they're cleansed. After hearing their heretical crimes, I'm quoting here, it was ordered that as long as they should live, they could hold no public office, nor could they be money changers, apothecaries, or spice merchants, or wear silk or fine scarlet wool, or colored clothing, or gold or silver, unquote. The irony is that these were many of the traditional trades of the Jews in Spain. Those who did not repent were paraded on foot, quote, and with conical mitres on their head, and with their hands tied to their backs of their necks with a piece of rope. They are brought to a tiered platform where their crimes were heard, and then brought to a plain where they were burned, unquote. The Inquisition trials were often a mess and filled with neighboring gossip and local animosity amongst many individuals, which we won't go into. They got in trouble for even not desiring to eat pork. If somebody says, I don't want to have pork," immediately they say, "Oh, you must be Jewish," and the Inquisition was at you. That's an example. In the Charter for the Expulsion of the Jews, 1492, the two Spanish monarchs list various reasons why they believe the Jews should leave Spain. This is where we're now on the last page of my talk. Okay. However, the main reason was the fact that Christians, quote, engaged in and continued to engage in social interaction and communication with the Jews, unquote. Furthermore, They believe the Jews, quote, seek always and by whatever means and ways they can to subvert and to steal faithful Christians from our holy Catholic faith, unquote. Therefore, they felt that in order to, quote, prohibit all interactions between Jews and Christians so that there will not be any place where they further offend our holy faith and corrupt those whom God has until now most desired to preserve. They needed to remove the principal cause of the problem and banish the Jews from the kingdom, unquote. There we go. The deep anguish of this action caused the Jews cannot be fully described. In Judah, Abravanel's heartfelt poem to his son, written in 1503. He tells of his separation from his son, he in Italy, and his son, because of force of circumstance, in Portugal. He cries out against fate and time. With his pointed shafts, has hit my heart and split my gut, landed me a blow that will not heal. He agonizes for his son that has been parted from him. However, he exhorted his son to stay true to his traditions, including learning scripture, um, uh, conning the commentators, memorizing the Mishnah, and reasoning out the Talmud with the 13 principles. Judah is also concerned with his family legacy as a scholar. To whom will I hand my scholarship? To whom can I pour the nectar of my vines? Who will taste and eat of my learning, of my books, when I am gone? And life was not easy for the Jews, as they received a rather lukewarm reception by many of the surrounding kingdoms. In the case of Ferdinand, Kingdom of Naples, while his reception was hospitable, his people were less than pleased, especially since an epidemic began and it spread amongst the Jews and then began to spread to the rest of the population. Now, the word began to spread that wherever the Jews went, they brought with them the plague that would, quote, kill them and their children. Elijah Kipsali still believed God was in control and felt that whoever would seek to harm the Jews would be punished, as he did to the persecuted Don Juan of Portugal, who died in great agony and childless. Yet there was hope. Who was to save the day? The Jews were being thrown out of Spain. They were not received well or at all throughout Western Europe. Nobody wanted them. The Muslims. Bayezid II, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, in 1481 to 1512, he, on 1492, he sent out the Ottoman Navy under Admiral Kemal Reis to Spain, to the Jews who were being expelled by the Spanish Inquisition. Tens of thousands of Jews were brought then to the Ottoman territories, and they were to gain immediate citizenship. Immediate citizenship. He threatened death to anyone who would mistreat the Jews in his realm, in the Ottoman Empire. Soon, of course, you take a look at Istanbul, Constantinople. Out of the population of 500,000 people, 40,000 of them were Jews within 40 years. Salonika was Jewish. So the irony of it all, right? Who comes to the rescue? It happens to be the Muslims who show compassion and mercy. Where are those Jews today? They are still living in Turkey. They are still living in Istanbul. They're still in Izmir. I've visited them. I've seen them. They haven't left. And it makes you think, we have covered quite a bit. As Spain and Portugal entered into the 15th century, political unity became at least a reality on the map. Although each part of the peninsula still retains its distinct flavors today, and certain regions advocating for separation, right? Right. However, the personality created under the stressful conditions of medieval Spain, now at this time in the 15th century, began to transform the world as various groups of explorers and colonists set forth from the peninsula down the coast of Africa and on to India and China, as well as across the Atlantic to the land of the New World. The history of medieval Spain is bigger than just the peninsula. It is the history of the modern world. Thank you so much. We covered it. Oh, man. I didn't think that was ever possible.
Wow. That was a lot of material.